So now is the time for our business meeting, and what we're gonna do now, we're gonna vote for candidates. But before we vote for candidates, you probably wanna know who they are and what office they're in. So we have some wonderful candidates.
I bought a shirt from Zach.
We're looking for a female co-chair, so if you haven't gotten it in your female heart yet, please think about being a female co-chair for the Green Rainbow Party this year.
This is the moment. Call for 4 nominees.
4 nominations for female co-chair, please. I'm calling for nominations for female co-chair.
In the absence of anyone, we won't elect one today, and it'll be passed forward to state committee to appoint somebody to serve as soon as state committee gets up together.
Are there any nominations? Are there any nominations? We're gonna move on to the next co-chair, Mike Pasky, I'm sorry, Mike. Mike Pasky.
Basically, go ahead and vote for each office. Rank, order, put a number next to write the name in yourself for the candidates on your ballot, the pink sheet. And put the number next to them, your number 1 choice gets a 1 next to it, no matter where you put it in that box. Put a 1 by the person's name. And if you want to rank a second person where there's multiple candidates, put a 2 by their name. But you're creating the ballot for yourself.
And that's because we're using ranked choice voting,
Thank you.
the way the rest of the world should be. So are there any more nominations for male co-chair? Are there any more nominations for male co-chair? Are there any more nominations for male co-chair? So right now we have Mike Peskinci for male co-chair. For secretary,
You don't have to write it down. Still.
write it down, please. Don't forget that number.
So we have 2 nominees that have gathered enough nominating signatures.
That's Mike Doyle, Maureen Doyle, and Mike Peskinci again. Babbitt, I'm sorry. I'm trying to read David's writing. Mike Vagula and Maureen Doyle. And he's also known as Big Mike. That's the secretary. It's on the page.
Toward the bottom of the first column.
So there are some competitive rights. Then one take which candidates.
Yeah, you want to give a minute to talk?
Sure, let's do that. Maureen Doyle, please.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you, Dan. Now we know why we invited you.
Big one.
Keep us in mind.
Secretary.
Thank you, Danny, because I did work on this. Okay. I have had a learning curve, as most folks do, in these past 8 months as being secretary. I thank John Andrews and Mary Louise for the Secretary's Handbook. Josh Gerlach and John Andrews have given me good advice from their past secretary stints. Lois, Eileen, and Brian have helped me with many issues also. I want to build on that foundation. Record keeping is so important in our daily lives and for posterity, as I learned on my town's bicentennial committee. Having a 10 key values plank against corporations, I am encouraging the GRP to use software like Etherpad, which is an open source independent software. I like how previous Secretary John Andrews did his minutes on one link that is accessible to all with an email. I want to do the same with Etherpad. So there is minimal time searching for minutes to approve or post or to refer to. I like being part of the GPO US Subcommittee, Eco Action, and the National Committee to share information such as Earth Day to May Day and things like that. Thank you.
Good morning, Mike. Mike Babbitt.
Hello. In case you don't know me, my name is Big Mike, aka Michael Platica. I've been serving with the party since 2018, and I do bookkeeping for my own small little business in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So I have a good track record of, keeping things organized in a simple way, as simple as going through an Excel sheet or through a Google Doc. And also I can implement good methods to keep track of state minutes and record keeping in that sense, where I would make sure that every member and any person that would like access to the minutes will get them and not have to be confused with it, finding certain minutes within a big thread of emails. So I have a software that can do that. With all due respect to Maureen, I know she's been serving as secretary for quite a while. I also have, a strategic way to deal with record keeping because I do have Asperger's syndrome, so I do keep track of every line item as it goes through and take attendance at stake-on meetings and any meetings that shall require the secretary's presence. I think my business is in a really, really good position based on what I have implemented along with other workers that I partner with. And, if you know me, I think you know that my track record has been exemplary. And I hope for the best and wish all the candidates their luck in this race. Thank you.
You need to spell Mike Wilson's last name. You're writing the names down now, right? And you need to write the names down now, and you need to write the spring, one of
Spell it.
VAGLICA. Our next position is Brian Cady for treasurer. That's CADY.
You probably don't need to speak unless you really want to.
Go ahead, Steve.
We're not gonna throw you out if you
Bring
don't.
attention to the position.
Well, we're gonna give Brian 30 seconds then.
Okay, let's circle again and continue to earn trust and keep track of the beans, count the beans.
In Bean Township. And so make sure you write his name down and make sure Ray. The next officer is Irene Wheeler Sheehan. She's running for Director of Communications. Irene? The illustrious.
So, I got into this job. And David Cal said, we have co-chairs, and would you like to be co-chair with me? So I said, sure, David, I'll be co-chair. And then David got replaced by my real co-chair right now, which is Jack Sunderhurst. So when you vote this silly name director, you're voting for and Jack, just so you know. My particular vision is that we've got three audiences and we're doing better with some than others. The first audience are the people that already know what it means to be green. And we are doing okay with that. We could certainly do much better. We're learning. The second audience are the searchers, the people that know that there's something wrong and they would like to be told how we could solve it. And we're not doing terribly well at reaching out to those people. And the third audience that I hope we reach are the people that have pain, that just don't know what on earth you can do. We've heard so many people say, you've got to change something, but an awful lot of people are very afraid of change. And we can be the light for those people, and we will be. But we've got a lot of work to do, especially with those second audiences. So that's what we in the Communications Committee, and I'm very proud to say we've got quite a few of them right here that are all getting signed up. It's not just me or Jack, it's all the communications people, and we welcome more people to help us in the communications. Thank you.
She certainly communicated that well. Our next position is Director of Fundraising. And we don't have any floor nominations. Are there any floor nominations for Director of Fundraising? Are there any nominations?
It's actually on the bottom of the column on the ballot.
Are there any nominations?
It's a very important role, right? Growth.
See how slow I'm going? Are there any nominations?
No, at this point, it's a floor nominee, yeah. So you need a live, willing, capable person. That's true.
Being alive really matters too. Yes,
The legal obligation of the parties, I understand that, raise funds, what's next on the,
I go by Danny's judgment.
Treasurer have no legal obligation.
Our next position is Director of Membership, and we have Zach Contra. You want to give us a feel of that?
I just want to say, I've only been director. Hey, guys. Excuse me. Yeah, I've only been director for about 5 months now. I took the position because it was in desperate need of filling. I've only been director for a short time, but I'm very happy with the team that we put together. We have some great young people involved with forming the Massachusetts Young Greens organization. For those of you who have seen our membership table, we have great over 3,000 new pieces of literature for our chapters, for canvassing and campaigning outreach for this year, so we're excited about unveiling those. Also, if a rep from each chapter would come and talk to me before the end of the convention so you can get your portions of the materials. And lastly, I just want to say we also put together a training program with PowerPoint presentations on the ins and outs of grassroots organization and canvassing, and we are looking forward to making sure that all of our chapters are well equipped with those materials. And yeah, we a lot of great stuff in the works, and we still have a lot of work to do. So anyway, thank you very much.
His last name is spelled Kontra. Contra. And he doesn't have any gray hair. That's good. That's a quote right there. Yes. Now we're up for female GPUS delegate, and we have Maureen Doyle. Are there any other nominations?
There are 2 seats we can elect.
That again is
Flip over
female.
your ballot.
That's female GPUS delegate. Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Casa Zavala. The next position is female GPUS alternate. We have no nominations now. Are there any nominations? Are there any nominations? Are there any nominations? Having heard none, we'll go on to the next position.
Female GPS,
Alternate.
delegate.
Delegate. And then it's alternate.
And then he asked for alternate.
You haven't been a delegate yet?
Yes, we did. Maureen. Yes.
Does she want
Want to give us a spiel, Maureen?
to want to do the what?
GPUS spiel,
You want to be
delegate.
delegate? Do you want to speak?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm supposed to be an alternate now, because we just had an election in September.
How many terms have you served?
They were interrupted,
Then,
so,
no, you don't have to worry about it
okay, then alternate. Then I am alternate.
then. No, you are.
You're the delegate.
Oh, okay.
It's a real thing.
We'll let your alter ego be
You
the.
get to serve another term.
Okay.
Would you like to talk about that, please? This is not just campaigning, this is also informative for the people here. It helps us with our learning process and focus.
Yes, what you do. Hi, I've been a delegate on GPUS, and I really like it. I think it's very interesting, and I've learned a lot from people. I'm not sure if you want me to be talking about my delegate terms that were interrupted, and I'm not sure if, I don't know if I should be an alternate, I don't know if that's parliamentarian here.
Yep.
So the term that you were serving has expired. This is a new term.
Okay,
And you're able to run for,
because I just ran in September.
um, yes, but that term has expired.
Okay,
And you're able to run for delegate. And even if you were alternate, since there's no delegate, you'd be acting like a delegate anyway.
Okay.
So
And-
you were like a
Okay.
delegate.
And there is a limit
So I'll
of
just-
multiple terms, but if you only are just serving your first current string of terms,
Yeah.
you're eligible to run for re-election for one more term.
okay. Okay, and I just wanted to say a little bit about, being GPUS delegate. It's all on email, and you decide on things that are part of the National Green Party platform. And there's a lot of good, lively discussion, and I appreciate, people's opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. You got my vote. Now we're on to male non-binary GPUS delegate. We have, two candidates, Danny Factor and Mike Pescucci. Danny Factor and Mike Pescucci. Please write those names down.
There's 2 seats.
There are 2 seats.
And there's 2 seats.
And this would actually be my 3rd term, because I just ran in September for my 2nd term. So do I have to be an alternate now?
Oh, that's a good question.
Probably.
Danny?
Are you aware of this as a GPUS rule or a GRP rule, David?
I'm aware of it only because David Geary exhausted his eligibility, and so he ran for alternate instead after a number of terms.
That's probably what you're doing.
In the
yeah.
absence,
The bylaw now.
in the absence of 4 candidates for male delegate, even if Mike became an alternate, he would become the delegate.
Exactly.
Right, that's the purpose of it.
So,
Okay.
So he could actually run alternate.
right,
You want to do that?
and then serve.
And then, yeah. You want to do that and change your,
Whatever is easiest, it's functionally the same.
People wanna vote for Mike.
I already wrote both of them under
that's fine.
That is under Mike. Yeah.
Are there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? And are there any other nominations?
In that case, I'll take your ballots as soon as you're ready to hand them.
Do we have a
Okay.
You are supposed to, because we need to be able to verify that you were an eligible voter. In case anyone ever questions us. There's the, yeah, pass them down.
Somebody have a pen I can borrow?
I just want to say,
Oh, yeah.
We have, go ahead. If the same people who are.
Yes.
Yeah, go.
I didn't time myself about 3 minutes. I'll try to be quick, but I'll do it.
It's good.
Order the board. Order the board. Yeah.
Hi, everyone.
Next Friday.
Yeah, sorry, I just had a short speech for makeup, so I just wanted to speak to you guys for a minute. So the first street I traveled was out of my mother's womb. And my first political act was crying out for attention and having someone address my needs. Those are the words of the late Mel King in his book Streets, which is part of the auction for them, by the way. I want to repeat that line. My first political act was crying out for attention and having someone address my needs. Unfortunately, politics often conjures negative connotations. The dirty game of power played by untrustworthy tricksters only concerned with personal gain. But at its core, politics is supposed to be the mechanism by which the needs of the people are addressed. And so a political party's core reason for existing is supposed to be to help people. And yet we have the war on women and reproductive rights, the demonization of the LGBTQ plus community and the violence against them, poverty, homelessness, food insecurity, gun violence, our unaffordable sick care system and the subpar elder care that we have, as well as cost-prohibitive childcare, the student loan debt crisis, racial injustice in all of its forms, racist policing, mass incarceration predicated on the racist war on drugs, marginalization of the indigenous, war on immigrants, environmental destruction and the climate emergency, exploitation of labor. Who's helping? It's the Republicans, it's the Democrats. How about us? As co-chair, my goal is to help the GRP be the party that helps people. First and foremost, by electing a female co-chair to fill Lois's shoes. Thank you so much for all you've done with us. Because I need help. I have 2 young kids at home, full-time job. I can't be co-chair by myself. But I also need help from all of you. We all need to figure out what needs the people in our communities are crying out to have addressed. And then how can the Green Rainbow Party help? What offices do we need to run for to address those needs? And what can we do to show that we understand those needs and how to address them? Can we even help without being in office yet? Because that's how we build and grow and overcome the barriers that are designed to keep us out. And that's how we get more Greens in government to help more people. Thank you.
You get my vote twice. All right, now we have a guest speaker coming up from the wonderful city of Holyoke, Massachusetts. His name is John Rivera. John J.R. Rivera is an organizer in Holyoke and serves on the tenant union leaders in the newly founded Tenants Union of Western Massachusetts. It's only water. We need water to clean the floor anyway, but sorry for the straw. Let me go back to start. John J.R. Rivera is an organizer in Holyoke and serves on the tenant union leaders in the newly founded Tenants Union of Western Massachusetts. John serves as the union liaison between the other tenant unions in New England. He is a paper machinery operator, and to bridge the trade unions with the tenant unions as the struggle for a better society touches us all. From the city I live in, and a great organizer for tenant unions, John Rivera.
Yeah, and thank you, Rick, for those amazing words, and I want to thank everybody here, the Greens, all you great comrades who have been doing this work for decades before me and generations before me as well. So just a big shout out to you all and to the people that came before us and the people that aren't in this room, the people that we fight for, et cetera, and so on and so on. So I'm JR. I am a tenant union leader and founder of the Tenants Union of Western Massachusetts, one of the founders and one of the many leaders that touches the entire land of Western Massachusetts. So predominantly we're in Holyoke, Springfield, and now in Northampton. And we hope to touch the 5-campus area, working alongside other unions such as GEO, the Graduate Employee Organization, and many other solidarity networks such as Neighbor to Neighbor, and different parties as well, and then different representation or different representative bodies in our municipalities that we touch. We fight for rent control first and foremost. We have a program for our tenants union that was just voted on last Saturday. We have a mission statement, so we're finally fleshed out. We started 2 years ago, just a group of individuals fighting for housing in Western Massachusetts. And we figured, there's nothing kind of, there's no body of organizations to really fight the powers that be, i.e. the slumlords, the landlords, the bad ones, and even so-called kind of good ones as well. We'll get onto that in just a moment, how we do that. So we started 2 years ago, a group of individuals. We figured, well, we got to unionize, right? We got to hit the streets. That's really where it starts to feel. Started door knocking. We started our first tenant association in Holyoke, in a place called Lyman Terrace, which is one of the better communities. One of the communities that I'm from as well. Lyman Terrace has its roots in decades of organizing. It was one of the very first public housing units in America. A lot of people don't know that about Holyoke. It's one of the very first of pretty much a good lot of things, such as one of the very first gridded cities, one of the very first dams as well. But in a nutshell, we're also one of the very first public housing. Decades of deterioration and immigrants moving in, and landlords basically not caring for the land as poor immigrants are starting to move in, have led to deterioration, which has led for tenant organizing. They finally they were gonna basically let it deteriorate and demolish it, but in the 70s and 80s, a couple radicals came around, protected that, and started rehabilitating a lot of these homes. So that's kind of the shoulders that I stand on today, is for all those comments that aren't here today, for those comments that haven't led the fight. And some of them are actually still part of the newly founded tenant association, which is Lyman Terrace Resident Association, or LETCOM, which is predominantly women of color, mothers. Surprisingly, a good lot of our membership are mothers. It's a really important topic, and I think all organizations need to really address. Mothers are at the center of our movement. It's radical. They push everything forward, right? Women, there's a really great quote where women hold half the world. Mothers hold up 50%. Hold up with the women with the children I think there. That's Lyman Terrace Resident Association in a nutshell. We've also been working for Springfield Gardens as well. Folks I've seen on the news. That's where other tenant association is. We're finally putting that property under receivership. Just want to lay out all this context because it's really important for the fight and how we bridge labor with the tenants movement. For years and decades, we've faced in the tenants movement that it's been very infantile. We've been scrambling to figure out where do we go, how do we do this, how do we fight landlords? Do we fight it through legislation? Do we fight it with simple boots on the ground methods of fighting against the slumlords? The answer is yes to all, right? Not only does the working class need a party of its own, but it also needs to take it out to the streets as well. It's a fight for people where it hurts. And it's not as simple as boycotting, it's as simple as the old traditions of labor. So we learned a lot of the lessons that we learned from through labor and the labor unions. And that's what we're learning today. We have political study circles where we learn the lessons as to how trade unions were able to fight for the reforms that really protected workers back in the 30s and 40s. So we stand on these shoulders of these giants who have literally died, bled, sweat and cried for the movement that we stand on. So we think that it's important to ground ourselves in these foundations as a tenants union. So we're a little bit more militant in our struggle in this perspective, but we want to find out what does it take to really cause a tenant revolution in this movement that has been so attacked back and forth by the powers that be, by the capitalists, by the Democrats, and even the Republicans themselves, right? So we take a good focus and we figured, well, we need to align ourselves with not only a party, but labor. And so that's basically the nutshell of my presentation today is how do we connect and bridge these things together? As we know, through history, as history is provided, whether it was, the upheavals of the Paris Commune or other movements, such as out in the East, the Chinese Revolution or anything like that, they paired themselves with labor, right? And they were able to fight against the landlords and the very, very rich of their countries. And it's important that we do the same here in the States. We stand on some good shoulders when regarding all this history. The big important thing is, how do you convince labor, right? Trades make, great money, right? And proudly so, they fought for that money. That money is the surplus value of their labor, right? For decades, they have fought for all these things. Well, how do we bridge, the fight for rent control when a lot of these, comrades from trades make good, money with pensions and benefits. So they might be a little bit conservative. Well, ultimately, they have children too, right? And a good lot of their children aren't going to be in unions. Unions are getting attacked left and right by the Republicans and the Democrats both alike. And so really tackling these things at the root. Well, what's going to happen in a couple of years when your children don't have a place to live in, where they're overpriced because of the landlords that live over in Boston or in New York City or, in the Bay Area that have not touched, your properties in probably, a good decade or so. How do we bridge labor and the trades to our tenants movement is really the big question that is posed, not only today within our own tenants union, but within the broader tenants movement in a nutshell. The Tenants Union in Western Massachusetts is connected with a good 50 different other tenant unions in America through the Autonomous Tenants Union Network, right? So this network bridges our tenants unions together to fight landlords and slumlords over in Boston and New York City, such as BlackRock, or even kind of more bureaucratic slumlords that are also kind of subsidized by the government. So we connect ourselves with this network of tenants unions. We recently had a Congress out in, it was an assembly here in Worcester. Thankfully, IBEW, the electricians here, they proudly let us use their union hall to organize an assembly of 7 different tenants unions, from Greater Boston Tenants Union to Vermont Tenants Union, Connecticut, Randolph, Feinberg, Worcester, and the list just goes on and on. Because this fight is really one struggle that we face as working class individuals, as OGs, as young folk, all alike, right? We fight ultimately for essentially a better life, not only for our children, but for the future of this earth, right? And so we see that a lot of these properties are not only getting deteriorated by the slumlords, but also by essentially lacking in governance. In the Tenants Union of Western Massachusetts, we've actually started running our own candidates. So we've been in the game for about 2 years. So it's pretty rare that we run our own independent candidates. But in the city of Holyoke, we are running our very first city councilor for Ward 2, Ashley Stackout, right? Because we need representatives in these bodies. That's of the biggest importance, not only in local, but more importantly, at the state level when it comes to rent control, when it comes to reform. Our main demand for the Tenants Union of Western Mass, and we hope other tenants unions also adopt this demand, comes from the railroad workers. I know we were talking about those comrades not too long ago and the mishaps that happened over in Ohio. I mean, you can't even really call it mishap, the outright genocide that's happening in Ohio. It's horrid, right? You have essentially this book of inspections that inspectors are supposed to study, right? That's about like yay thick. And they have, I think, 1.5 minutes to do these inspections on these trains. So the biggest learning lesson and the demand that we got from them was the nationalization of all rails under rail control, under the workers' control. And we take that within our own tenants unions. When we live in these homes, we pay rent. And who fixes our property, right? And how long do they take? They take sometimes months. Sometimes they take years. In my case, sometimes they take never. They let the property deteriorate. Well, these are our properties. We live in them. We love in them. We play in them. Our kids run around in them, and we cherish them. A lot of people think that renters are kind of this class of people that have nowhere else to go, but that's utterly not true when you knock on these doors. A lot of these individuals love the places that they live in. And I'm sure you've all kind of been in this situation. So our main demand at Tenants Union of Western Mass, we hope all other tenants unions adopt, is this nationalization of housing under community control, under government control. Because the slumlords and the landlords have shown time and time and again, and even the good ones, it's a big responsibility, right, to be a landlord. This is why it needs to be a group effort, right, of governance over our homes, over our land, where we can steward over it, whether it comes down to certain industries coming in. We need full democratic control, whether it's our homes or just the land that we reside in. So that's predominantly why we adopt that main demand alongside our comments from the Railroad Workers Union. And we hope that this also bridges to the other unions as well. You have a lot of these demands that are basically transcendental, right? They essentially, when one demand is put forward, a lot of other unions think about, well, why aren't we doing this way, right? The Starbucks workers, I mean, you saw from one Starbucks create 100 Starbucks unions. It's insane. And you have the same with Amazon labor. You have a whole generation of youth that are starting to, well, let's unionize our workplaces. Let's unionize the places that we work in. What we need to do, take it a step further and unionize the places that we live in, or that we love in, and that we pay rent in, right? This rent really should go to reparations of our buildings. So that's what we fight for at the Tenants Union, is that the money that we pay for actually goes where it's supposed to go, back to our land and not into the pockets of the greedy rich. And so back to bridging that through labor, we also need to bridge this through a party of our own, right? We can't get anywhere without these reforms. People are starving. I mean, people are getting, communities are getting gentrified. People are being displaced at outrageous numbers. And pretty soon we're going to start to see, as we all are aware of, a mass migration of people coming from a lot of these places that are basically ravaged by this climate catastrophe that has been imposed by us, by the greedy rich of our society. So we're going to have to take care of these brothers and sisters that are coming from these countries. And how do we do that? Well, we need to steward over our land. We need to take control over our land. We need to not only take control over our workplaces and our land, but as well as our governments as well. The working class needs a party of its own. And not only that, but a union of its own. That's what a party is when you take a look at it, right? Parties came from unions putting forward things. You take a look at the Workers' Party or the Socialist Party, the Green Party, whatever it may be, workers just coming together, banding together and fighting for what they wanted to do. It doesn't have to have these radical, labels, but essentially this radical program of this future that we want to fight for. And so that's essentially my just in a nutshell. Support your local tenants unions. They're out there, whether it's Worcester tenants unions in their fight, and really bring them in to not only the party, but also jump on those front lines, whether it's a picket or whether it's helping someone move back into their apartment or helping someone simply not move out of their apartment through evictions. So I don't know if we had any questions, but I know we're a bit over time. But that's
Right on time, actually, but we'll take questions if you want.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Yeah.
Let's go twice. Sure.
One moment, the Jack. And the rent's too damn high.
And the rest.
I just want to say thank you to John for coming here and for also helping me organize in my building in Northampton. Tenants there have been living without sanitary conditions for a very long time. And not only are they getting our rent, but they're getting public funding from the federal government. And none of it is keeping up the building. It was just built like 4 years ago and it's already deteriorating. Brand new building. Since we began organizing, our third meeting is Monday night. We haven't even formed the association yet. We just kind of put on the, that we're forming and hung the flyers up where everybody can see, including we don't even really have management, but, you know, the people up there who take our money, who also put on their own flyer calling our community room their conference room, but it's our community room. So we put in big, bold, red letters, in the community room, come meet again on Monday night. Blah, blah. So we haven't even formed the association yet, and they've already agreed to replace all of our washers and dryers by August and keep the ones we have now running until then. And they rehired our friend who, he did the cleaning of all the hallways and the stairwells. They like fired him a year ago and it hasn't been cleaned ever since. They rehired him, so and we haven't even formed yet. So I just wanted to say thank you and how important this fight is, because, you know, this is my home. This is where I raise my kids. This is where I rest my head. This is where, you know, my stuff is. This is where my cat lives. So it's really important. So thank you.
This is where you heal.
Hi, thank you so much for coming, John, and speaking to us. I've just been doing posts of what our different speakers have said, and I just want to make sure I'm quoting you right. You asked the question, or something like it, what does it take to make a tenants revolution? Do I have that right? Okay, great. And then you're from Holyoke?
Yep.
Excellent. And we need full democratic control over our homes, unionize our homes. Thank you so much. An interesting point that I just like, oh, wait a minute, that's where I grew up. So I grew up in New York City in a development that was a mixed income development. It was cooperatives, which were not that common then, but it was created by the typographical union number 6. So I grew up in the big 6 towers, even though it had 7 buildings, but because it was the union. And my dad was not in the union, but yet we got to be here, and I think it could have been more mixed income. There was rampant racism, and the neighborhood that I was in kept out Black people. We had, I think, 3 Black families in our entire, you know, large development. But still, the connection between the union and my home, and we, you know, a lot of people stayed. A lot of families, a lot of people stayed a long time. So I think there's been some progress in breaking up the, you know, white supremacy, but it's really great to make that connection. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your insight.
Thanks for all you do. I actually live in kind of an affluent suburb called Acton, just northwest of Lexington and Concord. And one of the things that we've seen out in the suburbs with the gentrification of the cities, and Cambridge and Arlington, it's harder enough to find affordable housing, is that we have very rising poverty now in the suburbs. And we've actually formed a tenants organization in our town and have come to see in this kind of setting, because you're kind of, I just always associate organizing tenants with cities, but you know, tenants who live in these areas, whether it be suburbs or rural areas, they deal with issues like lack of public transportation, no sidewalks, you know, for example. So, you know, there are all kinds of different struggles besides dealing with the same, you know, corporate landlords and all that. You know, I hope you grow and are able to, you know, serve more and more diverse, you know, communities because you can be a tenant anywhere. Absolutely. And we need a lot of support. Thanks. Absolutely. Thanks for what you do.
Hi, I was wondering about something. Now, do you deal just with the large corporate landlords? Just with the large corporate lands, rather than like some guy that owns a couple of three-deckers or?
Anybody, well, so it's really dependent. So we predominantly deal with public housing, like a section of kind of tenants. We do deal with large corporate landlords, like such as BlackRock. We also mediate services for small landlords and tenants. So let's say in a two-family apartment housing complex, we do mediate, like offer services of mediation between like that said small landlord and those tenants that live in said property.
Oh, okay. Just one other quick question. Do you do anything with organizing or creating cooperatives so that people can even develop their own housing or?
Yeah, that's a good question. We are aligning ourselves with the newly founded Community Land Trust in Holyoke.
Yeah.
To do that, which Rick is a part of, and so am I, to create a lot of these cooperatives to basically use the powers of eminent domain to really assume a lot of these properties into condos where we can own them. But there are a lot of nuances behind that. So definitely join your local community land trust and see what that's all about.
Oh, okay, that's the Holyoke Land Trust.
Whether it's Holyoke, usually most communities have a community land trust, but if you don't, get a couple of folks from your tenants union. I'm sure they would love to create a community land trust. It's something that a lot of tenants unions are exploring, such as what happened over in Cooperation Jackson down in the south by Kaliakuno.
Hi again, JR. And again, thanks so much for being here and doing everything you're doing. Do you have any thoughts at this point about major, I don't know, goals or targets at the level of the Massachusetts legislature? I remember at one point, they used to forbid communities from enacting rent control. You couldn't do that unless you got the approval of the legislature, so that's still true. I mean, that seems like it's especially outrageous because a community may want to have rent control, but at the level of the legislature where the real estate industry holds sway, they can block it. I'm wondering if that has been sort of identified as a target, and if there are other key targets like facilitating land trusts for the development of, basically tenant-owned cooperatives and things like that. If you can just fill us in on what's kind of, what the targets are at this point at the level of the legislature.
Yeah, so that's a really great point on rent control. Our comrades over at Greater Boston Tenants Union that we're very much aligned with have been kind of leading the struggle of rent control in Massachusetts, which is illegal currently in the state of Massachusetts. So they've been leading a lot of these. It has to happen at the state legislature from my legislation level. There are a couple bills. That's a bill package that's being presented through the House, I believe, or the Committee on Housing, that they're basically surveying, I think that's the right terminology, behind how can some of these tenant protections, such as rent control, be adopted in the state of Massachusetts. So wherever there's a state representative that's kind of co-sponsoring any of these things, there's definitely a tenants union behind it, such as the Greater Boston Tenants Union. We basically fall behind them on any actions, pressuring any certain kind of candidates or any certain kind of representatives in those positions. We hope, we're rather hopeful when it comes to rent control in the state of Massachusetts, but there are a lot of nuances behind it, such as conflicts of interest. For example, like you can't vote on, let's say, rent control if like you're a landlord. That's something that has been kind of provided by some legal advice, and a good lot of representatives and Democrats and Republicans all alike are landlords. So how do we really adopt these things is really the big question, and can we get enough kind of like people behind this? So from my understanding, back to, what's currently happening at the state level is they are surveying how these things can be adopted to certain municipalities, which is not the best answer. It's the answer you're going to get from a lot of state representatives. They're really pressuring the housing committee in the state of Massachusetts is really going to be the biggest bang for our buck, and relying on our comrades in Boston. As unfortunately, Western Mass doesn't really, we all know this, that Western Mass doesn't get the love that it deserves. And so does Worcester as well. But nonetheless, it's not to hate off of each other, it's to connect each other, right? That's the biggest goal of the Tenants Union of Western Mass, is to connect with our Boston, our Providence, our even Connecticut comrades. So that's it right there, and creating that voting block is also the biggest thing. That's really the biggest thing for tenants unions and labor unions. But for tenants unions, it's to create that voting block that we can endorse candidates, so that we can really run through a lot of these reforms that we want.
I got it. So I was next. It's not a question. I just want you to tell them what your organization, along with Neighbor to Neighbor, did when we met at City Hall, City Council chambers in Holyoke, Massachusetts, and we asked. I know one of the things we demanded the renters a bill of rights, and to create an office that deals just with tenants issues. You want an office of tenant? What is it called?
Tenant of Office Protections, or Office of Tenant Protections. Sorry.
That, and to help us while we're organizing. And I personally went to the mayor. Said, the mayor, where's his office at? He said he wants to create the office, but he can't do it in City Hall. But if we have a nonprofit that wants to be the lead on it, then they'll do that. They'll create this ad office for tenants.
Yeah, that's our small level goal in the city of Holyoke, is to flesh this Bill of Rights, which has now been adopted to be our program. Our main demands, it's a kind of 10-point program of the Tenants Union of Western Mass. We hope to adopt kind of many municipalities, and we hope that it's a blueprint for other municipalities, as well as the tenant of office protections, where we can create a landlord registry. Basically, we can kind of scale and rate a lot of these landlords when they come into our cities and whatnot, and a couple other nuances such as inspections, yearly inspections, pre-lease inspections. Being able to opt into the union as well as one of the biggest demands that we have. Let's say you sign a lease, we want to be in that lease, right? We want you to sign up within our union within that lease. We want you to know that we're here for you, that we'll fight for you if there's anything that comes up. And that rally had about, I want to say 50 people. That was a really terrible. I got the flu and COVID. I should have worn a mask. We both got it.
But we were there.
It was the winter. It was bad. Wouldn't have recommended it, but we really fought, and just the conditions that a lot of people live are really, a lot of people don't think that it's drastic, but you knock on some of these doors and wow, it's enough to give you like PTSD. I know we have a question back there.
Hello. Very great presentation so far. But I have two things. I think one's a comment and one's a question. My comment is we also have to recognize that when it comes to paying rent in a day-to-day life, we have to recognize that usually the landlord is not the person that's pressuring the check to be delivered to him. It's the person that's above him, and that goes directly into state involvement and property tax. So property is being inflated just like everything else at this point right now. I think we've all seen that. So I think this is highlighted in the plans that we are discussing today is how to address that property tax inflation and the general cost of every property in the state of Massachusetts, and to keep it not at a rapid increasing rate, but rather keep it as level as possible,
in order for people to not be gentrified out of their home that they've been living for decades, if not multiple decades. And my second question is, what remedies are we going to do right now to help people that are homeless right now? Or what kind of facilitation is going to be provided for them? That way they can be under a roof and not under a bridge. Thank you.
Great comments. Tenants unions really are the biggest kind of defense on that. Essentially, what we fight for is to also create a list of the vacancies as well. There's tons of vacancies. A lot of people say that we need more housing, which is true, but there is a lot of housing already that's vacant, whether it's Airbnbs or whatever. We need to eminent domain a lot of these properties and take them under the control of tenants in its entirety. I hope that kind of answered it, but you have really great concerns that a lot of our homeowners have as well on the taxes bit that we're also tackling, but that comes with a lot of nuances itself too. But I'd be happy to chat with you afterward.
Thank you, JR. We don't have any more time. Any more speakers? If you have questions for JR, fine. He's not going anywhere. Is that right?
All right. Dr. Paul Matheson is the Director of Sustainability and an Associate Professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering Department at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. His background includes more than 35 years in the environmental engineering and water resources disciplines. He serves as the co-director for WPI's Water Resources Outreach Center and Boston Project Center. His current interests include water resources protection and supply, control of non-point source pollution, resilience and climate change adaptation, and cooperative approaches for managing water resources. Dr. Paul Matheson.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay. It's on. Okay, it's nice to be here to hear the dedication of everybody here and recognize the importance of the environment was always here. So I want to spend the next few minutes just talking about some of the characters, some of the considerations regarding water resources in Massachusetts in general. And the title originally thought of was really working together to protect our vital assets. And, when you think of assets, I should start off by mentioning, I'm an engineer by background, so tend to be, you would normally think engineers and think of assets like the infrastructure and things like that. But when I think of assets, I think broadly in the sense of looking at both our environment, the people, and all the things that are impacted that we really have to think about working together. And hopefully you'll get a sense for that as I go through the topics on this here as well. And I'll add one of my roles is this position as the co-director of the Water Resources Outreach Center, which is basically a project center. It's the WPI, a student project center, which is really intended to both provide educational experiences for the students and as well as provide support for the communities who have a great many needs in the area of water resources. So one of the ideas is to reach out to them. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And some of these topics that I'm talking about today actually build on some of the presentation or some of the topics that the students worked on recently. So For this time, I'm just gonna spend some time talking about some global considerations to start. And then I'll just go through some regional issues, looking at say, issues involving water supply, rivers, stormwater, wastewater management, and just some considerations regarding working together to try to address some of these problems and wrap it up then anyways. And what you'll find is two things. Well, certainly the impacts of the role of understanding water resources and working together to address the problems seems to come up a lot. Certainly climate has a huge impact on things these days, so we have to really keep in mind. So first thing I'm just going to mention, I'm going to throw out a few numbers for you here. So the first one, 352 quintillion, is the number of gallons of water in our oceans. So, and if you want to know, which I wouldn't know off the top of my head, there's 18 zeros in quintillion. So there's a lot of water out there. Okay. The second one is to go on to 65 billion is the next number I have. And this is actually the gallons of water that's in Wachusett Reservoir. Wachusett Reservoir is one of the major water supplies, or reservoirs supplying the city of Boston, an important part of the water supply system. And that's there's a lot of water, and a lot of things to think about for that. And then finally, this one here would be 8 glasses of water is what apparently they recommended not to drink in a day. It seems like more than that actually, but of course I make up for it in coffee anyway. So, which is probably not good for me. But hey, but I was going to try to looking at think about populations. How much water does all make up? But I decided we'd leave it at that. But I will want to make a few notes on thinking about some of the concerns that we have to think about. In terms of the percent of the world's population in urban areas. We're talking over 50% in urban areas that we have to think about for the world's population. So urban areas are certainly becoming very important. And there's another number in terms of thinking about the number of cities out there that really don't have wastewater treatment facilities for their systems. And this is just an example of one of them. But there's 10% that has are equipped with treatment plants. So there's really a great need for trying to think about and then trying to recognize the proportions of population and percentages where they really are using improved sanitation facilities. We're doing pretty well here, okay, that's good. But there's a lot of places throughout the world where there's tremendous needs, as you can see by the different colors shown here, certainly in Africa in particular. So there's great needs throughout the world, certainly for that. We're seeing certainly population growth, which leads to increased water demand. As well, you can see there's been significant increases in growth, both in the overall population as well as the rural population. And the other thing is that the issues involving climate change add real stress to the whole thing because there's just great needs. There's changes that we're seeing in real time here now, and it's a real concern. Certainly, you can see it's kind of hard to see this figure. The red blotches are not good. Let's put it that way. Okay, if you can see that, and then so those are the areas where there's depletions there, and then this area too, we're seeing more variability in which you get higher, I guess you say peak flows and intense storms, and also more drought conditions as well. Those are some of the impacts that we have to think about here as well. Now, if we think generally about the nature of our Earth's water, as you saw some of the numbers I had there, I don't want to get into the slides, it's not a great one, but the idea is that overall, out of the waters in the oceans, there's not that much fresh water, relatively speaking. It's like 2.5% you see on the left-hand side. Of that fresh water, a lot of that fresh water is bound up in glaciers. We like to say, keep there. And there's a fair amount of groundwater, which is not all accessible for drinking water. And then there's a small amount of surface water. On the right column there, basically, it looks a little bit more detail at the surface waters, recognizing that there's some in there's some water in the atmosphere. There's some in rivers, some in living organisms and plant vegetation, as well as marshes and soil. So, we're working with a small amount of water that we haven't really been very nice to the water that we've been working with. So I guess I want to just spend some time talking about it. I'm going to start off with talking about drinking water. I just want to bring some topics up, but maybe you're familiar with this. Actually, how many people are familiar with PFAS? It's a good number of us, okay, and that's okay. It kind of prompted, we had a recent student project related to this, where we're working with the Mass Department of Environmental Protection. And they're really working to try to address this. This is a concern. So if you're not familiar, PFAS basically represents per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. Let's say that there's some of the others. There's a whole host of these chemicals that are out there. And there's usually 6 of the major ones that they're looking at. And you can see there's like a little chemical signature there. But the bottom line is, it's kind of hard to see these figures as I look at it now, but you know, the sources, they're through every dry products that we've been using, they're still being used, but they're working hard, they've been trying to reduce the use of those products. But they're, you know, very persistent chemicals, they're sometimes called forever chemicals. And they're known to have health effects, and that's been raised as major issues, you know, in terms of some of these issues about high blood pressure, cholesterol. You know, there's certainly in particular, you can see them here in terms of some of the impacts they have. And then there's also just concerns, especially among some selected populations, where some concerns in particular regarding these chemicals. So, you know, and as shown here on the left is basically indicating that, you know, there's just a whole host of things where these things have ended up in the environment. And, you know, and it's, I won't say it's interesting, it's concerning because, you know, when you look at when they get in the environment, they're very persistent, and you put them in the lake, put them on the lake and spread out, move out, expand it even further, get fish. So they're really getting into a lot of this stuff. One of the concerns that this particular project was looking at was the idea of you know, I guess, well, let's put it this way, in these communities, in public drinking waters and supplies, they are regulating PFAS in these supplies, and they're working at it, and it's a challenge for communities to try to deal with these because it's costly to deal with. Okay, for private water wells, they really aren't. You know, they are not publicly regulated as such, and so this is what this student project was trying to look at that. And now one of the questions there, you can just see the split there. It's kind of hard to see again with this figure. So, too quickly there. There we go. And then, but you know, the bottom line is people really are not familiar with it, and that's kind of why the question comes up. They don't really know about it. They really don't understand it very well. And you know, I guess if there's any need is basically greater awareness of the issues that we're facing. Okay, better understanding of these issues, and understanding what to do. You know, why do you want to test your well? You know, you want to make sure, see whether you have it in there. You know, and there's lots of challenges because, you know, in some ways people don't always want to test their well. They don't want to know what's in there. So there's lots of challenges, and that's one of the things that we try to think about, raising awareness. I think in our student group, one of the big things is looking at how you might incorporate bylaws into the local communities and how local communities can work at that. And you know, so and there's, you know, there's just great needs for education and for engaging people and really getting them involved in that process. So that was the one example that I had there. And then I want to spend some more time just talking about, I call this one climate and rivers, and because there's just a lot of issues regarding in general for Massachusetts to think about regarding rivers, and they're actually rivers, they're beautiful rivers in the state, and great assets, I guess you'd say there. I haven't used that term, but and assets for all the people who use them, and they're really a very valuable thing here. Now, with climate change, the climate patterns are really creating problems regarding drought, and even flooding as well. There's really concerns regarding that. You can see this is just pulled up. This is some of the drought concerns that we have for the United States. There's like low-level concerns going on right here now, even though, you know, people, you don't usually think about it here because we seem to have plenty of water, it seems. But, you know, the problem is that, you know, well, we're seeing this variability, and, you know, we really use a lot of our water too. We really do. So we're not very careful about it. We're not very careful about what we do with it, what we're doing with it. And you know, there's been a lot of development. You know, we're pretty densely populated areas, you know, so as you see in the slide. So those are things to think about in terms of the issues regarding, you know, drought. But there are efforts in here, and I know the Massachusetts Rivers Alliance has been really pretty dedicated trying to get the word out about, you know, an idea of trying to think about how can we manage things in an integrated sense more so, rather than having community by community. Some communities do it, some don't, you know. And if you're in an area like this watershed where all kind of the water's going to the same place, the concern is that, you know, it's not easy when some communities will have pretty strict guidelines and the next one's overdone. You know, so how do they manage that? So they're trying to think about different ways to come up with a regional approach. And I know there's legislation that's been proposed recently that they're working on too. So those are things that would be helpful to be aware of and to keep track of that, because I think they're really important considerations. The other thing, as I mentioned, the idea is that I kind of view it as a watershed approach. And this is the example of the Blackstone River watershed, in which the city of Worcester, where we are now, is in the upstreams, the headwaters, you might call it, of the watershed. And all the water from here will flow, work its way down through the Blackstone River, and eventually end up down in Narragansett Bay in Rhode Island. And, so, as you can imagine, people in Rhode Island are rather concerned about the nature of the quality of the water that's going down from here too. So that's an issue. There's certainly concerns regarding the issues regarding locally here regarding flooding and the impact on communities. And that's what I want to spend just a little bit of time talking about a little bit more. First thing, I'm going to talk in general about the Blackstone River. First thing is a classic industrial watershed. That was industrial age, had a huge impact on on the country here. As a result of that, we've done a lot of efforts on trying to channelize the river. We basically, there are a lot of dams there. They're really limited fish passage. There's a lot of culverts too. And that was one. I'm bringing this up because we have one project looking at with culverts. How many people know what culverts are, by the way? I guess we look at the schedule. Not necessarily. Culverts are basically those pipes that go into the railroads. Essentially, you're not familiar with it. That's another thing that we have. Like the railroads are not very good about doing that. You may notice that they basically we're not very good with their culverts. They historically we haven't really been. They're always kind of limited. They're very old. And they really need a lot of restoration. There's a lot of work, and it relates to climate change too, because there's a lot of issues regarding, what happens when you've had these culverts there for a year and for many years, and then all of a sudden we see increases in rainfall intensity. We're going to create flooding. Who is that going to impact when you look at the flooding? Who are the people who will be impacted by these things, by these streams? So there's many issues regarding that, and I'm just going to step through a series of slides on looking at Worcester. To look at Worcester's stormwater management and talk about that a little bit. And it's kind of a complicated scenario here, but it's look, this is an example of, there's examples of Worcester that are similar to many industrial, the oldest cities in Massachusetts. But if you look at this figure here, if you can hopefully see those little blue lines there, those represent the streams in the city of Worcester that kind of all work their way down to, of course, the first thing to note is that they don't just end at the city line. Okay, they keep going, even though they're shown that way. But that's the problem. That's what we do, and I left it in there. It's like they continue on, and we should keep that in mind. But what you also notice is there are not many of those blue lines in the middle of the city. Okay, and that's because it's all been buried underneath and put in stormwater into culverts and stormwater pipes and things. So if you look at the stormwater pipes, they're actually shown in green and red there. Somehow I got two different sets of them. But the bottom line is all these stormwater pipes are bringing these things to some central pipes, basically, which bring them down to the Blackstone River. So that's basically our stormwater system, okay? But on top of that, in Worcester, we have what we call a combined sewer system in Worcester. How many people are familiar, know what a CSO? Have you ever heard of a CSO?
Yeah, but
okay, so combined sewer is basically what, and I have this shown on the next slide. This is the central area of Worcester is what they call a combined sewer system. Okay, so in dry weather, okay, as shown on the left, what happens is, the sewers, the wastewater, all goes in the sewers down to the surface and then go on the way to the wastewater treatment plant, get treated, and hopefully put back into the stream river in pretty good shape. So, okay. In wet weather, though, in these old areas, they had the same pipes that they used for both the wastewater and the stormwater. So in some of these areas, the stormwater would go in these same pipes. The pipes really did not have the capacity. The wastewater, the treatment plant did not have the capacity. So they basically have these overflow relief points where they just basically discharge those into the streams. Okay, and that's kind of the scenario that you see for many of these different these older communities. So it's not good during wet weather. That's what you usually don't watch out during wet weather when you want to go swim these things. Okay. But it's like, now for Worcester, it's a little complicated to talk about, but the bottom line is they are not quite, in some ways the scenarios has some flexibility because basically if you go to the dry weather as shown in this first figure here, the stream, the Blackstone River, the streams from the Blackstone River shown in blue, stormwater flows into there. It's still not good, but it's okay. It's a little better than this, and the wastewater will go straight to the wastewater treatment. Now, in wet weather scenarios, they also have this thing which they have a CSO, combined sewer treatment facility. Okay, so this is kind of the stuff that goes that once you have the stormwater and wastewater in the same pipe, it's like a mixture of stuff. Okay, and what happens is there'll be relief points within the sewer system. Basically, they will come over. The wastewater will go straight to the treatment facility as before. Well, the combined will go as much as you can get there will go there. What can't get there overflows into this interceptor sewer, which goes to this, actually in Worcester, which I have a treatment facility, which is nice. They have a treatment facility for this. They capture a lot of it, hopefully most of it, I'm not quite sure, but they do have this scenario in place. Now, the catch is that they will, whatever they can pump to the wastewater treatment plant, okay, which is good, as much as they can. What they can't, well, they will treat it as well as they can and then discharge. Okay, so now, you have that scenario where you're still, there's some treatment, not that much, but there is some treatment for it. And, so the question is that certainly remains a concern. And I guess the concern particularly is if you look at the city and you look at the impacts of climate change and the fact that we have, very well-developed area. There's a lot of impervious areas, so the water runs off very quickly, and you get the storm events that are getting more intense, and so it's a big concern about, what's going to happen and how do we plan for it, how do we manage for it. It's a costly thing. They're certainly working on it. They're very dedicated. Dedicated. There's still this huge cost to try to deal with these things. Now, the two things I want to add to it is one thing. They have these discharge notifications, which are really helpful. And those are, the Mass Department of Environmental Protection has developed a program where you're basically, the communities will notify the public of any discharges of wastewater or combined waste that are going into streams, so that they can have awareness of that. So that's to increase awareness of it, make sure that people are aware that if they're going in there, and whenever there's a discharge, they want to try to notify people. Sounds great, and that's going to be posted to websites and stuff. And I will add that, there's this integrated water management plan, which is going to be very expensive. There's a plan for it in place. There's a Green Worcester initiative. There are a lot of initiatives going on, and they're working at it. But I guess the things to keep in mind too, though, are that if you look at, and this is just Worcester, and the same is for other areas too. And I just chose the environmental justice areas where they have designated areas within the city, and it's pretty widely distributed throughout the city of Worcester. What you'll notice is that the areas that, and they're just very designations here, but the little red lines that represented the CSO area happens to be right in the areas where you see some of the more the issues regarding environmental justice areas. So kind of the question is, and I draw this, and I kind of regret this figure here because I call it flood risk areas. I pulled off some flood risk areas, and it's not to say that there's actually this flood. It looks like a flood right there right now, but the bottom of it is a risk area. But has been flooding in the city of Worcester. There's concerns about that, and there's particularly concerns about the people who live in these areas and what impacts there are on them. And the other question is, notification is great, but notification has to get to people. So one of the questions might be, how do you notify these people? What if people don't really, if you're really not connected as well as you can and just don't get the word out, you're getting that word. So how do you get that to people? So I guess it's another point of just thinking about how we communicate, how we work together to address some of these issues. And this is a figure that I pulled up from a paper. And some of the things that we think about as an engineer, historically, engineers would be, you design something, you'd like to love the engineering numbers and everything, but we recognize that really to do these water resources initiatives, it really involves close coordination with the community and recognition of the breadth of people that are involved or that are being impacted and engaging them in the process along the way. So what are there's different levels of the nature in which you're partnering with these people. You provide information and try to clarify, or you can provide information and you actually gain feedback. It's kind of a nice thing, or you actually work with the public to understand the concerns and really partner with the public throughout. So there's the whole process of engaging with the public, which I think it's certainly been in the political sense for a while, but it doesn't to really engage that is really an important thing to keep in mind. So I think that's the end of the main things I'm thinking of. Now, I actually have a few different slides. That's pretty much the messages to think about in terms of what I think is really just, one of the questions is partnering and engaging the public. This is all of our resources. So how do we come together and actually, get people engaged, involved, and aware of these issues that we're facing? Is this a huge issue? If you look at some of the, and these are the water resource outreach projects that I have, and they just have to hit on some of the topics. These are ones that are actually coming up, looking at, one of those on Cape Cod, there's a big issue regarding nitrogen going into the estuaries. That's kind of another topic. It's like once it gets down towards the coastal area, there's a big concern regarding nitrogen, which is associated with the wastewater that's going to end up into these things. So there's initiatives to try to look at how you try to do a better job regulating and managing that is one thing that they're working on. There's other areas of looking at sea level rise and the impacts of sea level rise, trying to incorporate new approaches that are more effectively mimic the natural environment to try to manage it, called green infrastructure, I should say. And so there's efforts to try to incorporate that such that you can not only make it, like in this case in Chelsea, Massachusetts, an acid, which is Essex Creek, which is a marsh area that can be, something that can help protect against climate change due to sea level rise, but also serve as an asset for the community. So there are many things to think about with that. And then these are the projects that have actually just finished up here, which and kind of most of them built on this one. Pretty much, I kind of brought a few of them: the culverts issues, trying to be effective in culvert repair, drinking water, and PFAS. There's another one that we actually had on looking at the impact of warehouses on communities. This is a big concern that people have, is looking at when you look at these big distribution centers that go into a community, how does the community respond to it? How do you make sure that you're protecting the people in the community? And then finally, recognizing that, this is a huge area that I think is growing. There's a great need for it, and I think there's lots of opportunities for people to go into this area. I'd like to encourage that. Okay, so as I just wrap up, and I just include the names here, just basically there's a key role of the climate. Some of the topics of interest certainly that are related are certainly protecting our land surface water and trying to manage our wastewater and our stormwater effectively. And recognizing the complexity of these problems, both in terms of linking the technological and social considerations and how things come together. How do we, and then thinking about how we engage stakeholders as part of this process. This is such a huge thing for, I guess, in many different areas, but for water resources, it's always seemed to be one of the things that I've found, intriguing is trying to gather people's inputs, engage people, and actually cooperate together to address these problems. So I'll leave it there, but welcome questions or comments or suggestions on some of these issues. Yes.
So how does all this tie into?
So how does this tie into the quality of drinking water at our public schools? I know that a number of times they found, I think it was actually the PFAS in the water. However, I don't see any real on-the-ground advocacy or long-term solutions proposed for communities. And so I ask, as a parent who lives adjacent to a school, we're right by the Square Water, Columbus Park area. What is the best way to advocate for drinking water at our public schools?
That's a very good question. I guess, and you're right, it's a big concern. I think that they are, in terms of when there's a public supply for water, there's definitely an awareness of the issues that are involved with PFAS, for instance, and lead for that matter too. One of the issues is trying to get, there's the issues associated with the water supply itself, and then right at the tap where it's being connected. And I thought, my understanding is, I think that there's been a huge push to try to focus on schools in Massachusetts, because I know that there's a full recognition that want the kids and children to be not impacted by that. In terms of advocating, I'd say probably, both through from my end, I'd like to welcome other people's thoughts on it. So certainly through the town and through the first thing, the state and the registrar would be important to be contacting your Congressman Holman as well. But I think it's a sense of going both regionally and locally. It's the best I can say.
And then another question, so public housing, what water, would that be a combined system, or is that municipal, or is it private? Because we have a problem like at Lakeside Apartments where they were doing construction recently, and whenever they water their new grass, all the water would be black for days and days and days. And so my question is that a private stream, well, or does that belong to the city? Like, who owns that?
It's probably dealing with it's a good question. There's probably, it depends on where it's located if you're looking at these different types of areas. Now, that looks like, it sounds like it's stormwater runoff, there's regulations, actually there's requirements, permitting requirements that people are supposed to include as far as any construction. So if you're seeing that, when there's a construction site developed, there should be requirements to try to protect the water that's coming off that site. When there's putting new stuff in, it has to
They
be.
use the water that they use in the firefighters, those fire hydrants to water the grass, and that's what causes the water to turn black. That's why I asked that. So saying that they use the fire hydrants to water the grass and to do a lot of the work that they need to do, water-wise? Yeah, yeah, so my question is, how does that impact the water? Because that's what happens.
Well, I will say that, if it's from hydrants, which is interesting, that's what they're doing. It's the public water supply, so I would think the water supply itself is clean. It's what's coming off, when it goes on the ground surface and stuff starts running off, is what they have on that surface, which is usually the concern. So if you're in the city of like Worcester, in a very industrial area, or something that's really either industrial or heavily, the land use has been heavily used for lots of traffic, and stuff has been dumped on it. Once the rain or any water that goes on there comes right off there, you're gonna have stuff that's being carried with it. That's gonna be the concern of what they have on that site and how they're protecting what's coming off the site, because they should be controlling that, I know, through whether quite often you see hay bales on the side, but sometimes.
Videotape the hydrants.
Yeah, comments.
Hold it on your chin like this.
Good questions. I don't know if I have the answers. So.
I think some of the black material that Melanie may be referring to, is it manganese that precipitates out in the water lines?
Yeah, well, I know that manganese will come out in the, when the oxygen gets really low, the manganese will come out. You'll see precipitate out as black.
Right.
Manganese. I'm not sure if it's coming out.
Yeah, so if they disturb piping somewhere, they disturb that stuff that's lying in the pipeline. And that's not necessarily dangerous to health. Right.
But iron, sometimes you see iron and iron's in too bad. But yeah, it's a good question. It's hard to know exactly what it is in that particular instance. But that's a possibility. Yeah.
And are you aware if a grid style, point of use for point of use water filter can deal with PFAS?
There are point of use water filters that can deal with PFAS. They have different types, and they, including, basically carbon absorption is one of the best ways that people do it. Not the cheapest thing, but you can use, I think for PFAS, I know, there's the standard that people have, like a refrigerator water filter that you might have. Probably does not do it. You probably need to have a special, just make sure you have a full filter on that. So, that's gonna be one of the things I think for like somebody in a home, that's a, it's a huge concern. You have a private well and you're drinking water out of that well, and it's PFAS is not something you see necessarily. It's not going to show up. Certainly the water's discolored. That's probably other issues, but PFAS is just something that you don't see necessarily but if it's there, it's a concern, obviously. And so that's why it's trying to encourage people to get the water wells tested, so you know if it's there in the first place. But it's kind of expensive.
We have Mike, Jill, and Danny, and then several more.
Okay.
Good job, Jack. Hello. Great presentation so far. My question is, how would this project prevent a situation like what happened in Flint, Michigan not too long ago in terms of the specifics? Like what action would we have to do basically just to prevent another scenario like that? I know you've outlined some great thoughts about it, but I'm thinking like what role would you take to prevent that sort of water contamination crisis as a relevant example of what has happened before? Thank you.
Okay, it's a very good question. I guess And without having looked at that for a little while, one thing that was for sure was that in that particular instance, there was, the steps that needed to be taken certainly were not taken along the way.
Right.
You know, and that included steps, from my recollection, among multiple agencies, in terms of both, you know, directly, and, you know, an ethical manner in terms of making sure that, you know, the tests are being done properly in a short time frame, you know, and then they're being addressed and taken to the proper places. So one of the things, I guess, is those checks and balances, to think about how these agencies work together, what standards that they're held to, in terms of trying to make sure that we're protecting our children's schools, you know. And I think that the vast majority of the people that certainly, you work with the people in both the Department of Environmental Protection, of course, you get people who are very dedicated. You know, so overall, that's, you know, the intention is good, and that you want to make sure that there's those checks and balances along the way, you know, and probably that to me, more awareness, more advocacy is necessary in general, because, you know, it's got to be coming from the grassroots in ways, just to make sure that's happening. Those are just my takes on it, though. Again, probably there's some comments and questions. I'm sure there's a lot more that can be. That's a huge topic that can be discussed further. And yeah, certainly did. Yeah.
Great, thank you. And again, thanks, really terrific talk. And I guess the question I want to ask is kind of a case in point of trying to engage the community before the water gets polluted. And I'm wondering if there's anybody here who drinks the water in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Probably not, but if you know people, send me their contact info, because the Cambridge water supply, you may know the big Cambridge Reservoir, which is right along 95 and Route 2. It's like, how do they ever allow that to happen, to put kind of polluting highways like really close to the water supply, and then you're in the watershed, so everything's draining down into the watershed. Well, my town, which is very in bed with developers, I'm in Lexington, and unfortunately Cambridge's water supply is not in Cambridge at this point. It's in Waltham, Lexington, and Lincoln. And my town is going to approve mowing down of 5 acres of really important watershed forest. Watershed forests are like how you keep the water clean and how you keep the pollutants out. So in all their wisdom, they're going to mow down 5 acres that are like right in the watershed, basically. Well, I should say they are in the reservoir, because there's a little like peninsula that juts into the reservoir. And this is where, you know, stuff is flowing down from commercial and industrial development. And Lexington has control of this project, which is going to affect Cambridge's water supply. And the people in Cambridge don't know about this. This is being sort of, what can I say? You know, it's a land-based solar development. Solar is great, but you shouldn't be mowing down forest to place solar, and you especially shouldn't be mowing down forest that protects the water supply. So it's just like nuts. And Cambridge doesn't know about it, at least the people don't. The water department is trying to stop it, but I don't think they're going to be able to. It's being rammed through. It's really a political thing. So if anybody has contacts with people in Cambridge, let me know, and we can check in about that. But I wonder, Paul, if you could say a couple words about why watershed forest matters and what it means when there's erosion, you know, because solar installations are famous for erosion, so you never want to put it in your water supply. If you could just say a few things about what erosion is going to mean for the water.
Okay, so that's good questions. I guess so for a water supply, certainly, you know, if you look at like erosion, first instance, the sediments that crystals that will be washing off going in the reservoir, but they also tend to carry a lot of contaminants associated with them. So if there's contaminants and things that for land use has been using, those sediments will tend to have a little bit more of that and can get down into the reservoir as well. So for a reservoir, the area, the contributing area certainly is very important for maintaining the protection of that reservoir. You know, certainly, you know, if there's roadways, whatever, where there's heavy traffic going on there, that's a concern. You know, so as you increase the water flowing up, you're gonna increase the amount of erosion because this water moves along more quickly. It responds more quickly. When you have vegetation, the vegetation will encourage more of the water to basically to infiltrate or to, be delayed and to respond more slowly and then slowly work its way to the reservoir. And it will provide an inherent treatment along the way as it goes into the reservoir. So, in that sense, there's the more vegetative cover that you have along in the areas that are tributary to the reservoir, certainly the better. So, there's certainly, trying to, different municipalities and different, this idea that whole watershed approach, trying to think about it in an integrated sense, how it all comes together and how communities come together is always an important thing to consider.
Yes, I'm trying to one eye. We're getting way over time.
Way over time. I apologize for that.
So, PFAS is really a crisis, and it's a real example of profit over people, right? Because if you look at some of these products, it's like, Scotch Guard for, protecting your sofa from static, the remediation that towns are having to do. I know our water district is practically doubling its budget this year to deal with how expensive it is to remediate PFAS. And, isn't the obvious solution to ban PFAS in products? And the state of Maine in 2021 passed legislation to do that. It doesn't go into effect until 2030, which is too bad. But at least they passed it and it's starting. And we get into that patchwork of states again. Don't we need federal legislation, as is going on in Europe, to ban these products? Isn't that the most humane and most cost-effective solution? And just like the scientists have, kind of stepped out of their boxes and become, political activists as far as climate change, are we going to hear the voices of scientists and engineers calling for banning PFAS in products? Isn't that the real scientific solution?
Well, it's interesting. It's trying to reduce the PFAS in these products is a huge consideration. And I guess in some ways, from what I understand, is the PFAS, there's some the basic forms of PFAS, but there's so many different other smaller forms that are into the different properties. So, they might ban one thing and then they're moving on to the other. So you need this integrated sense. So it's a fair point, so like in terms of, having people not have their non-stick pans and things like that.
Yeah, you can ban the product too.
Jack, I have a comment.
Yeah, I think our time's up. I wish I had an answer to that one, but.
Sorry, we haven't
As a
cut out the
fair
questions.
question. Good comments.
I wanted to be in the queue for questions too, sorry. Be right out.
About the whole bottom, 40% of that was gone. Yeah, we should see that. Utility construction. 15 years.
Where's the,
Stormwater.
All right.
Frank, is this yours?
Huh?
All right.
Who's your fifth?
We're just wondering,
Well.
Hello.
Okay.
Hello.
Good part of the area.
We're still having a convention.
Yep.
All
right, folks.
Years.
All right, we're going to start our workshops now. Paul Poppinchuk is a retired engineer with 47 years of experience in the energy and facilities management field, including the design, construction, and operation of fossil fuel, nuclear, and renewable power generation systems. Let's learn the causes and solutions to climate change together so that we may work individually and collectively to mitigate the dangers all living beings face.
was all nice, clean work, I mean, unless you're repairing a live line, what you want a live. Tapping into the main, you know, the whole subdivision, just working nice, clean work. What
There you are. That's what I want, right there. Need something?
No, seems like people are busy. There's a 5-minute break on the schedule.
Oh.
Well, that could be a lot of fun when you had to lay a shoreline and granite. You know, they have 50 holes.
I'm ready to go whenever.
Packed full of ammonium nitrate.
Let's go, Bob. We're having a workshop here. In order for me to hear the workshop, I can't hear them because you guys are talking. Please stop. Thank you.
So good afternoon. My name is Paul Papenchuk. I live here in Worcester. The only thing you need to know about me is I'm a grandfather. And so I'm keenly interested in the future that my grandchildren are growing into. I have to wrestle here with this. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. Acknowledgements are given to bring forward that which oppression works to erase. We gather today on the traditional unceded land of the Nipmuc Federation, and we remember that Black and African people's unpaid and forced labor built white wealth directly, and that people of color continue to endure the trauma of racism. And so, the agenda, I want to talk about the effects of climate change, impacts, solutions, and what we can do about it. I call this the Zen of climate change. I find lots of guidance in Buddhism, which talks about the interconnectedness of all beings. This is the endless knot and represents that the interdependence of all nature and ourselves on each other and on nature. The Eightfold Path of Buddhism includes the seventh principle, which is right awareness, to know the situation in which one happens to be so that one can respond appropriately to that situation. This is a shot, the famous shot from the Apollo mission that first showed us our beautiful blue Earth hanging in the darkness of the universe and brought a awareness of the interconnection of people and the planet. This is a picture of our atmosphere. It's this thin slice of 60 miles depth, and it is essential to life on Earth. This is where the ozone layer is that protects us from cosmic rays, and this maintains an atmosphere for us so we can breathe. And unfortunately, we are treating it like an open sewer. We're dumping over 160 million tons of
pollution into this shell every 24 hours. And this is the source of our climate crisis. When we talk about the climate crisis, we look at the various sources, and the major sources include transportation and the use of fuels for heating buildings, and agricultural use, and that one is particularly promising in terms of a solution, because our agricultural practices in this country are a function of what we choose to, the diet we choose to maintain. When you look at the sources of emissions, they are nitrous oxides, the carbon dioxide, of course, fluorinated gases from computers, and vapor compression cycles of refrigerant units. And if you look at the U.S., the role that transportation plays and electric power generation, these are all the areas that we need to address urgently to address this crisis. In Massachusetts, these show the percent of natural gas that is used for power generation. Oil is in the blue, and I'm pleased to announce that that orange section was coal. And the last coal-fired plant here in New Hampshire, in Bow, New Hampshire, did not win a contract in the latest ISO New England forward capacity market. And that was the only thing that kept it running. It was viewed by ISO New England as an essential resource to maintain grid stability during deep demand periods. And it did not get a contract, and it will close in the coming year.
Yeah.
If you look, there's skeptics out there about climate change. If you look at the data, this is a pretty clear trend. From the 1800s forward, you can see the direction that the global average surface temperature is going. And so it is safe to assume that this will continue unless there's some major changes. This is reinforced by the fact that 20 of the 21 hottest years on record is because I had more I didn't have as much time as I had imagined. The hottest of these years have been the last 8. And so we look at our beautiful blue Earth, and what we see, for years scientists have been saying, well, if there's climate change, how come the temperature isn't going up faster? We would expect because of the amount of heat that's being retained within the Earth's atmosphere. Well, it turns out that 93% of that heat is going into the ocean. And this is a problem because you can see the extent of the warming of the ocean. That the light blue is the surface to 300 meters, and the dark blue on the bottom is down to 2,000 meters. That's more than a mile into the ocean. It's starting to be affected by warmth that it is absorbing from the effects of climate change. Half of this increase has occurred in the last 20 years. So how does this impact hurricanes? If you think about the oceans, more intense, warmer water makes more intense hurricanes. They intensify more rapidly. Warm air holds more moisture than cold air. And we know that because, in the winter when it's cold, our sinuses dry up and everything because it's so cold. When we talk, I'm going to have a little pop quiz here. When we talk about relative humidity, what is it relative to? Oh, no cheating in the back there. No, it is temperature. That's right. So the ability of water, an air vapor mixture to hold moisture goes down as the temperature declines. And so warmer air holds much more water. Storm surges are increasing due to sea level rise. Why is the sea rising? Why is the sea level rising?
More water takes up more water.
Exactly. It's not that the glaciers aren't a factor, but take a pot of water at room temperature and turn on the heat and watch as it warms up, it will actually grow in volume. Storm surge, big problem along our coastlines, and a wavier jet stream holds storms in place longer. You hear about these long duration storms. And this is all part of the water vapor cycle, you know, where water from the ocean evaporates, it goes into the atmosphere, and this is all part of the water vapor cycle, you know, where water from the ocean evaporates, it goes into the atmosphere, it turns into clouds. When that air cannot hold the moisture that it has anymore because the temperature has dropped, it begins to rain. And so that's where we get precipitation, and it runs off, and it all finds its way merrily back to the ocean. And so with warmer water, we're experiencing much more intense storms. Here's a picture of a storm in Midland, Texas. And the other result is that we're seeing things like Hurricane Laura. It struck Louisiana as a Category 1 storm, and it grew to Category 4 in a single day. Hurricane Delta went from a tropical depression to a Category 4 hurricane in 36 hours. It was a new record. And so this warming in the Gulf, the Gulf last year when there was a tropical storm that originated there, the water in the Gulf was at 92 degrees. That's bathtub water. Netherland, Texas received 5 feet of rain in a single rainfall. It was the most ever recorded.
When was that?
Let me see.
Does it have a year? No?
I don't have it here. Sorry.
That's all right. You're not in trouble this time.
Okay, and of course, we can never forget Hurricane Katrina and the damage that was done there. And of course, what we saw was the clear relationship of the problem of environmental justice, where it was the 9th Ward, which happened to be that part of New Orleans that was below sea level and protected by dikes, and dikes that failed, and that area was very badly damaged. 80% of the flooded area was in Black neighborhoods. Losses for the whole storm were in excess of $190 billion. When people say that reacting to climate change and doing things to prepare for climate change is too expensive, we have to remember the cost of not doing something. And we also have to remember that the people who are most affected by climate change around the globe are the people who've had the least to do with creating it. When we talk about climate change, one of the big challenges will be to our infrastructure. Professor Matthewson mentioned how about the effects of stormwater. Our pipes were designed with criteria for sizing stormwater drains that was more than 100 years old. And so it is, our infrastructure is not able to handle what's happening now. In the good old days, we had the jet stream circling the poles And I'm an old guy, but I remember growing up, I never heard the word polar vortex. And I don't know how many of you other folks of an advancing age can tell that was the same situation. Now we're seeing how the jet stream is causing these really, it's going into these crazy configurations that are contributing to longer duration storms. And the poles are warming at a rate that is 4 times the rest of the globe. And this is a big problem because it's creating a situation called the positive feedback loop, where the methane ice that's in the permafrost at the poles is melting, releasing methane into the atmosphere, which is making global warming worse. And so the more methane that's released, the worse it gets, which makes more methane be released. So that change in temperature, again, is being seen unequally at the poles. This is the jet stream on February 15th, and you can see how wavy it was. And what this did was contribute to the major freezing that they had in Texas.
Oh, yeah.
But also you can see here the rate of sea ice lost in Antarctica, and I'm sorry, that's on land in the Arctic, and in the Antarctic, and in the Arctic, it's in the ocean, and that's another positive feedback loop because you're replacing sea ice, which is white and reflecting sunlight, with nice dark green water, which absorbs it. Another effect is intrusion of seawater and coastline into water sources. This shows the coast where the Gulf Coast aquifer is in Texas, and seawater is intruded into that because of rising seawater levels. Another response to climate change. This is a community, Jean Charles, in to relocate the city of the original town of Isle de St. James Charles, because it was near the seacoast. And it's something we really need to look at, this idea of storm insurance, because people live on the coast, they have their mega mansions down on the Cape, there's a storm and it gets damaged, and they rebuild it. And we need to redefine where buildable land is because of rising sea level. We need to redefine where buildable land is because of rising sea level. This is sunny day flooding in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. My son lives in Miami, and they had the same situation there. They can have a clear blue sky day on a king tide, and the merchant area downtown will flood. And consequently, what they did in Miami was to raise they poured a new floor on all the buildings, and the first floor essentially became the basement. And so they raised the roads and everything to, again, address this issue. And Boston already is seeing this down at the waterfront too, where there's flooding on a regular basis. And here again, there's dramatic effects that have been caused to health by climate change with the warming warming temperatures. And the way this affects it is through infectious disease, impact on water, mental health, heat stress, air pollution, food, etc. And here again, how many of us heard the term West Nile virus growing up from mosquitoes? Nada. Oh, you did hear it growing up?
Oh, growing up?
She's trying to act like she's 15.
Hard living.
Yeah. So, big health effects related to this, not the least of which this idea of mental health. I know that I find myself in a state of despair, and it's only by being active and trying to work with the city and my community to address these climate issues that keeps me from sinking deeper. Air pollution from fossil fuels kills nearly 9 million people a year just from the problem in the air, or the particulates in the air. And tick-borne diseases have more than doubled. This is going to be a big tick year because we had a very mild winter, so be mindful. And likewise, mosquito-borne infections have increased by factor of 10. And here again, it's the equity issue. When you look at the percentage of black children in the US with asthma, it's more than twice that of white children. And the death rate from it is 10 times higher for people of color. And so, who's the most vulnerable to heat? The poor, homeless, elderly, children, those with pre-existing conditions, the mentally ill, agricultural workers. Imagine when it's 100 degrees out. You know, our skin temperature is 92 degrees roughly, and when we sweat, that's how we regulate our temperature, because we need to maintain a temperature in the body. And so when we sweat, that water evaporates, it removes heat from us, and that's how we keep cool. Well, when it's 100 degrees or 110 degrees, a migrant farmer working in the San Fernando Valley in California is at high risk and may not be able to work outdoors anymore without special accommodation.
Hope for you.
And here's, it's happening here. We have the concept of the heat island effect. That's when you have 3 or 4 days continuously that are over 90 degrees during the day. And I was involved in a study with WPI, my wife and I both, we were involved in this study where we went and monitored. We had a very sensitive instrument, and my wife and I the infection or the invasion by the Asian longhorn beetle was the worst in the city. And if they found evidence of the Asian longhorn beetle, they would clear cut an area of, I don't know how many feet around it, so that many people lost their trees just because of 7 p.m. Large mass like sidewalks and streets and buildings, concrete buildings, parking lots. They build up the heat and they don't release it to the night sky because it stays continuously warm. And so the temperature builds, and with senior citizens like myself, it's a real danger. And a luxury, it's a necessity. And yet many of our fellow citizens don't have it. And who's to blame? Who's responsible for all this stuff? The fossil fuel industry, just like the cigarette industry, could be was going to occur. Indeed. The 16-inch high-pressure gas line released the equivalent of the amount of emission from 16,000 automobiles would produce in 1 year. Expected to retire 20 gigawatts of gold, retired by 2030, and these will be fully retired by 2030.
Good.
And so what's the cost of all this carbon that we're facing? It's causing political instability, doing it because they want it. Professor Matheson told us how many gallons of water there are in the ocean. I think that we've changed the pH in our precious earth. And global annual plastics production their annual plastics production. There are millions of tons per year being produced. And show and tell, it has 60 loads, it can do 60 loads of laundry detergent sheets that look like this. We'll do a load of wash. This box issues fantasy that recycling was the way to deal with things are recycled. 2.5% are incinerated. You see that big incinerator town, and so be mindful of the packaging. Thing. The lowest emission source of energy to heat a building is electric energy through the use of high zero here in New England. And so my wife and I are making plans to convert our gas furnace. That we need to do a major shift to clean energy economy. And so when you look at recent power generation in this country, 80% of it was from solar and wind. And in August of this year, the U.S. passed the investment, the IRA, the infrastructure, no, the Inflation Reduction Act, sorry. Yep, that's it. And it has lots of money in it for incentives. And for incentives for things like these heat pumps that I mentioned. This is a picture of an evaporator cassette. I know that in the office area, we have a big boiler downstairs in the basement to heat the church and all in this part of the building. And we used to run it all winter because during the week, because the office area up here relied on that boiler for heating. So we put in heat pumps, and now our boiler sits silent for 6 days a week in the winter. The cost of wind energy has dropped dramatically, and the Block Island Wind Farm, seven turbines were installed, and they have run nearly 80% of the time since they've been installed because there's such a rich wind regime off of New England. Vineyard Wind will add another 92 windmills and with a capacity of 880 megawatts. And this is a wind map of Massachusetts, and it shows in that red area where there is sufficient wind regime to economically install a windmill. And so the Block Island was the first East Coast offshore system. Soon there's going to be many more, and it can be applied down the East Coast of this country. When you look at the cost of silicon solar cells, they used to be $80 a watt back in 1976 when only NASA was buying them for their space systems. Now they're down to 22 cents a watt. And so my wife and I just put a 5 kilowatt system on our home that'll make twice as much power as we need, but we're going to get an electric car as well. And the city of Worcester, I'm really grateful for the city. They've created the Green Worcester Plan, and they're striving to be the most sustainable city, mid-sized city in New England, if not the country. And this is a capped landfill that's you can see the railroad lines there. But the city put, this is a 8 megawatt solar system that the city owns, and it's the largest municipal solar array in New England. You know, and this stuff, I talk about despair. But once we meet net zero, it is estimated that global temperatures will stop increasing as soon as 3 to 5 years after that. And so globally, we of course can't do this alone. The US and China trade back and forth, being the first and second biggest sources of emissions in the country. But we have a tremendous opportunity to set the example for the rest of the world. And in Worcester, that's the same thing is happening. The Green Worcester Plan is going to transform our municipal and school buildings in our city. And unfortunately, the WRTA, the regional bus here, it's free, and people are not using it. So this will be important because transportation is a really big source of emissions. So, and likewise, once we do get to net zero, the oceans and the trees that we have can take the remaining surplus amount of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere in about 30 years, it's been estimated. And so I was sorry to hear about a forest being cut near a reservoir and to put in a solar system. Until every roof in this city is covered with PV, we should definitely not be cutting trees, because mature trees are our best defense against climate change. They are the vacuums that will take CO2 out of the air and sequester it in the soil. And we cannot, I know in my community, if you've heard of Duffy Field, they were going to, Duffy Field was in my neighborhood, and the city wanted to put in an artificial turf field. Well, like Professor Matheson said, we're the headwaters of the Blackstone River. And these artificial turf fields, they use crumb rubber, and the runoff from them has all kinds of pollutants, and that would have gone right into the Blackstone. So we got 800 signatures, and we told our city council, thank you, but no thank you, and they changed their minds.
Political will.
That's right, just like the Green Rainbow Party. I love talking to a group of advocates and activists. And so transportation, we talked about, it is a big deal. And we have the opportunity to, again, change our direction. Electric cars the sales are increasing, and the key is infrastructure. We need charging infrastructure, because right now there's something called range anxiety. If you've got a 250-mile range on your car and you're driving up to Maine, you better damn well know where all those charging stations are between here and there if you want to finish your trip.
That's a niche, put bike racks on the back of them.
Just in case. That's the spare tire. No, but this gentleman on CBS News, he recently did Ford Corporation gave him an F-150, the most widely sold truck in America. They gave him an electrified 150 and asked him to drive it for a week and then report back. Well, he went from Boston to Maine, and what was a 3-hour trip took him 6 hours because he had to stop and charge, and at one point find a charging station because it was nighttime, dark, et cetera, et cetera.
Wow.
But the infrastructure is developing, and the quantities needed are developing. This is a battery plant that Mercedes is open. Tesla has a battery plant down in Tennessee. I don't know if it had anything to do with influencing Mitch McConnell, but and in Florida Power and Light is replacing these 2 coal-fired plants with natural gas plants with a large battery storage system that can be charged off peak and discharged on peak.
Makes sense.
Total sense. They're putting a gas turbine in Peabody. I don't know if you've heard about the Peabody Peaker.
Yep.
But the local, that's a municipal electric company, they're putting in that gas turbine because they have to satisfy a requirement by ISO that each entity has a certain amount of backup power. And they could have done the same thing with batteries, but they chose not to. And, their investments in renewables and conservation, to do all, if you're ever thinking about putting solar on your house, do everything you can to reduce your load first, because that's much more cost effective than putting solar panels on your roof. So conservation is always the low cost option. And cycling and walking. When we moved here from Connecticut, I wanted to live in the country because I grew up on a farm. My wife said, no, we gotta live in the city because we'll have to drive everywhere we go. And boy, was she right, as usual. And so if this next chart shows the comparison of the carbon footprint of travel per kilometer, and you'll see that domestic flights are at the top, followed by a medium gas car, a medium diesel car, long haul, short haul flight, buses, motorcycles, rail, ferry, and so on. So we have choices on transportation. And it turns out that bicycling has so many side benefits, like getting healthy and fit. So,
Where's bicycling? Where's bicycling?
Bicycling, yeah, it doesn't even register.
That's the point.
Right. And investment in public transit creates more jobs per dollar invested in paving highways. If you add more highways, you just get more car traffic. And so, again.
And black tar.
Yeah, that's right, and heat islands, yeah. And agriculture and the food system are key to climate change response. This is in the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations, and it tells us something we should all know. And that is, it takes 16 pounds of soybeans to make a pound of beef. And with people starving on this planet, we'd be much better off eating the grain and not the beef. And so this top line shows the greenhouse gas emissions, excluding methane from beef, and then the emissions from methane. In other words, the flatulence of cows is significant if you've never owned cows. And I mentioned that US and China are the number 1, number 2 emitters. If you put all the cattle in the world together and treated them as a nation, they would be the 4th largest source of emissions on the planet. And so let's learn to enjoy our vegetables and fruits. And likewise, cherish our trees, because they do so much to filter out air pollution, reduce flooding. I didn't understand how a tree with a canopy on it, when it rains, right now, Worcester gets a lot of flooding. Certain areas flood repeatedly in a big storm, including in the South Worcester, an area called Green Island. Well, guess what? It used to be an island, and so it's really low, and they filled in all those wetlands and paved them and built houses. And so it's not surprising that they get more flooding than others. But when it rains, trees hold that moisture, and they re-release it back into the atmosphere, so it never makes it into the storm drains. So there's just so many benefits: the habitat, the health and well-being. There's been studies that show that if you walk a mile on the city streets for exercise, and you walk a mile in a forest, you get much better, many more health benefits. So use your voice, use your vote, choose your choices, speak truth to power, like your world depends on it. And I know I don't have to tell this group that. So, thank you very much.
Teamsters?
Yeah, right here.
Okay, then, just making sure you're here. We're not ready for it. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Set up, well, I'll take the rest.
Yeah.
I'm good.
You didn't talk much about geothermal. I was interested in how geothermal fits into the picture of renewable energy, if anything. Oh, there we go. And
Mic check, sweet. Thank you for the presentation. It was really beneficial, but I was wondering like a little bit more about geothermal and how that's kind of like a renewable source of energy and how municipalities are kind of going forward with exploring geothermal. Holyoke being kind of like one of the municipalities that's currently going through exploring geothermal as well as through the benefits of municipally owned gas and electric companies. So definitely explore that.
Yep, so I mentioned heat pumps as a way to heat a building or a home. And air source heat pumps, you have a condenser outside that takes energy out of the air in the winter or releases heat back to the air in the summer when you're in cooling mode. Those operate, they're very efficient, but when it gets real cold, they are less efficient. And so when they're in the shoulder months, when it's spring, fall, you might get 4 kilowatts of power of heating out of a heat pump than you would for every kilowatt you put into it because of the vapor compression cycle. Ground source heat pumps are much more reliable because if you go down 5 feet, the earth is pretty steady. It's at 50 to 55 degrees. And so if you sink a well and you extract water, or even some of them are dry wells, they just use the earth to absorb and release heat. They are much more reliable because they're working with a steady source of energy or a steady sink of energy, whereas the heat pumps, when it's hot, and cold, the air source, they don't work as well. But they're also more expensive because you have to drill holes. And I know we looked at our house and we'd be hard pressed to get a well digging unit on our street. So, yes.
Hi, I was grateful that you mentioned wetlands, as did the previous speaker, and I didn't get a chance to encourage everybody to join their local conservation commission because it's so important to keep our wetlands alive. And the second thing was you mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act. That was such a big giveaway to fossil fuels, as a previous speaker mentioned. And I don't think that solar and wind will end fossil fuel production because they have to make them somewhere. They do have a lifestyle and or a lifespan, and so you have to get more, and they're usually made across the seas with cheaper labor, so you have to get them here. So it's not really a saving. I applaud that you mentioned conservation. And it's not just individuals, the companies need to do that too. And the fourth thing I wanted to mention was when you mentioned some health effects to humans, I didn't see mold on there, and that is like a huge issue. And I believe that ties in with the tenant issues, because a lot of older buildings are very susceptible to mold, and it's just getting worse. But thank you for your talk.
So quickly, Greg Garcia, working with students at Holy Cross and 5 trees. So perhaps the Bristol area is the place to do that.
And then I'm wondering if maybe at some point, like now, any day, we can kind of have a conversation about the effects of the climate on humans. Just because I know there's the Worcester Public Schools has a summer program. These children are out in the elements, 90, 100 degrees in open land, and they're mostly Black and Latino children who are susceptible to, blood disorders and anemias and asthmas. That a lot of them, it's said, it's not proven that it comes from those school buildings. And so how do we, and as a member of both NAACP and as a mom, how do we advocate using similar data to bring the attention to what's happening with our students throughout the city? I feel like they have nowhere to run. They're stuck all day in the sun. And then another component to that is that we advocated for some kind of an awning, but they said that they break. And so I know that you care about the environment, also as a grandfather, how come I would love to work together to find a solution, but to, kind of use the voice, right? But scream loudly in my own way to advocate for these kids and for their health and safety.
I'd love to.
One more question, that'll be the last one. Sorry, Dave. We're half hour over.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, can you say anything about, in the building industry, specifically about the use of cement and movements to move to use more sustainable building materials? And it also goes a little bit to what Maureen is saying about lifestyle. If you look at the trend of building bigger and bigger houses, for example, the average going up from 1,500 square feet to 2,500 square feet and more. What needs to be done about the way we live and where we live, the structures that we live in?
Yeah, that's a real issue because I live in a 100-year-old house. And the first thing I did was call Mass Save, the Clean Energy Center. They came in and they did a free energy audit, and then they paid for all the insulation that they added in the walls and in the roof and in and the air sealing that they did to reduce the infiltration into the house. So I highly encourage people to use Mass Save. If you're paying an electric bill, you're paying into a conservation fund, and that's the best way to get it back is to have that applied. Now, there's a real dilemma if you're a renter, because it's the building owner that needs to initiate that process. And yet they've now made some exceptions where tenants can ask to have that work done and actually initiate that work with the Clean Energy Center. So take advantage of that. And the other thing is, if you have an electric bill, our electric bill has three components: generation, transmission, and distribution. We have control over where our generation supply comes from. And the city of Worcester did a municipal aggregation program, and and people who hadn't signed up, because a lot of people just look at the bill, they pay it, they don't know about generation choice. And so, to the city's credit, anybody in the city who had not chosen an alternate supplier was given the opportunity was put on the city of Worcester's community unless you chose to opt out. And their supply of green energy is almost double what the supply from National Grid is, and it's cheaper. And so if you haven't done that, again, take a look at that.
My question, that's about existing structures and making them more energy efficient.
You're right.
My question was about new buildings.
New buildings, right.
And how can we curb that?
Right.
Do we need to build so much? Can't we rehab existing spaces? Look at all the brick and mortar, vacancies, for example, with everything going online. Do we need to build that much? And can we build when we have to build?
Excuse me, you sound like a socialist. No, because the basic problem is capitalism. Plain and simple. That's the worst, that's the biggest enemy of the environment is capitalism. because capitalism is built on the false narrative that you need growth, 2% growth every year. And we're living in an environment that doesn't expand. Natural resources don't expand by 2% a year. So there is, so the idea, do we need to build this much? The answer is absolutely not. I say that there is a housing shortage in Worcester. People want to live here. They're doing what's called the Mass Vulnerability Project. It was a state mandated study by every community to look at the effect that climate change will have on their community. Guess what the number one danger or impact that climate change will have on Worcester? Who can guess? It's not sea level rise. We're at 500 feet right here, so we're probably okay there. Stormwater, flooding. It is climate migration. It is the people living in the desert Southwest who are running out of water, and they're going to come to New England because it turns out this is a pretty good place to live. Not a lot of tornadoes, not a lot of hurricanes. We have some hurricanes, not a lot of earthquakes. And so this is going to be a highly desirable, that's what the study revealed, is that we are going to be overwhelmed with people who want to live here. So be ready to welcome them with open arms and make them part of our community.
I'll let them move here and then I'll move there.
Hey, but also to address your last question, materials. When you measure emissions include the emissions involved in extracting the oil from the ground, transporting the oil to the refinery, the energy to refine it, to finally, make this piece of plastic. And so this is what's called embedded energy. We can burn oil or gas and that creates emissions. That's a class 1 or a class 2 emissions. Class 3 is embedded energy. And so here again, look carefully at the products you buy. You can buy an individual, you can buy tomatoes that are grown in New England in a hothouse or that are shipped up here from Texas, And so from a diet standpoint, you can use avocados from Mexico, or you can eat squash and pumpkins and other fruits or vegetables grown in New England. Big difference in the embedded energy in those products. So be aware, be mindful of those things. And the last thing is concrete. Concrete is the most used construction material, and it has the highest embedded energy. WPI has done some great work. They've developed new formulations for concrete that are lower embedded energy, significantly lower. So the thing is to get the cement plants in the area to adopt that, because it is a fundamental reconfiguration of what they use for fillers and things that go into that concrete. But you're right, and people are building 3- and 4-story wood frame buildings, but of course that's not real good for the forest. So it's always the middle way, as the Buddha said. Find the middle way. So.
Our next workshop is not going to be as long. We come to terms. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. You did great. We're running out of time. That's why I shortened this one. It's Evan Elray's. Go say your name.
So my name is Evan Pajades Soleri.
There you go. It's the founding member.
5-minute break for bathroom.
5-minute break.
Okay, 5-minute break. Meanwhile, I get to practice on this name. Pajades O'Leary.
Pajades is what we can.
Correct. No kidding. You get the island and you did. Both islands.
Excuse me, it would appear to me that these rebuilding this, is that correct? Okay, this is my
That last name.
That's the game.
Yeah, that's it. So it's the game. He actually, when he quit, I'm just saying, man. No. You think that? But if I speak broken Spanish, you speak broken English, we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, my Spanish is pretty easy.
I mean, it's really enough to like we had to figure it out. Keep doing. That's just I never thought to look at your name till now. I would say that. That's cool. James. What's the old then?
Oh, so
Oh, I get it.
in the Irish monarchy, it wasn't really segregated.
Right.
So oftentimes, so any Irish nation that goes that's the signifies it was a really so the most signifies the name,
Wow.
In the 700s, around 700, my family used to rule my great-great-great-grandmother.
Check this name out. This is the name I tried to pronounce.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, it's a full line. You know, look at that photo. You know, I remember reading the first line of that, like, it was after they went to communists. So I did not see it. And then it goes on and on. I mean, we definitely like to sign on to announce this. So we had to see yeah. Thank you. I think it's so I think if you mind if I do. It just okay, oh, that's so cool. It's really nice to meet you. Do you want my email too?
Right. We're gonna bring him back now.
After. Yeah.
Please come back. We're starting up again. Please come back. Thank you. We're starting another workshop. I'm getting ready to start another workshop right now. Ebron Paleres Oleri is a founding member of the Independent Socialist Group, serving on its national committee and a 4-year package handler at UPS, part of Teamsters Local 170. Ebron also serves as the recording secretary of the Futures Committee of Teamsters Local 170, the youth wing of the local. Viva la youth. This coming August 1st, the 5-year contract of UPS Teamsters is set to expire. The International Brotherhood of Teamsters elected a new international leadership under Sean O'Brien. We will learn what a strike on this scale entails and why solidarity is important to all of us. Here is my brother from another mother from 2 islands, Evelyn Paredes Oleri.
Hello, can everyone hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, nice. So, sorry, this is gonna be 20 minutes, and then we're only gonna be taking 2 questions, but I'll still, try to talk as much as I can, and also, I just forgot to start timing myself. So yeah, my name is Evan Pajari Soleri. I'm not gonna actually repeat all of that, but I'm kind of speaking on behalf of my union, Teamsters Local 170, about something that is incredibly happening right now, which is our new contract negotiations. And when it comes to the development of modern capitalism and stuff like that, the logistics industry has been an incredibly integral part, and thus, because of that, has actually put an incredible amount of power concentrated in specific groups of workers. That's delivery drivers, that's package handlers, that's anyone working in these warehouses and stuff like that. And therefore, orientating to these workers is incredibly, incredibly important. The Teamsters Union and the contracts that we get, especially at UPS, is a industry-setting, contract. If we get something really great, other companies like FedEx, USPS, Amazon is going to try to compete with that. And that's the only reason why those jobs and those industries can sometimes have a better perk than us at UPS. And even then, those are very temporary. So for example, not here in Worcester, but in the Midwest, if you work at Amazon, you're actually going to get paid a couple dollars more than you would at a UPS package center. And they only raise those wages, a year after UPS upped their wages too. So, that's just one example of, how these things have a cascading effect. So before kind of going into more of those broad perspectives, I want to kind of focus on why are UPS Teamsters striking? Because I think, at least in my opinion, kind of seems that in general, logistics workers don't get a lot of coverage in the media. And especially when it came to the railroad workers, there's this odd thing where it's like, oh, they get paid fine, they get good benefits, so what's their issue? Why are they complaining? And UPS is kind of like that too. I mean, I have incredible healthcare. I have the closest thing to universal healthcare you could think of in the United States. It's a broad Teamster healthcare package plan. Everyone pays into it. The company contributes to it. Other things contribute to it. It's a good example, kind of like how Medicaid is and works that way. And I have nothing to worry about. And this also applies to my kids. And I don't have any kids, but if I had kids, it would apply to them and a married spouse, which I don't. I'm only 24, but not happening anytime soon. But many workers have nowhere close to the levels of protections I have. So, for example, one of the things, and this is a good example of how strong a union can be, is at my job, I don't even get, they can't fire me for attendance. I'd have to get a really long, bad streak of attendance for them to even have that as a disciplinary thing. Safety concerns in my contract, they can't rush me to go faster at all. They can't use the words, even if it's an implication, I can grieve them and get like 20, 40, 60 bucks from that, considering the nature of it. And so, that puts something like that is a great standard for a contract for other workers to adopt. Nonetheless, there's still issues that we're facing. And if people kind of remember, does anyone remember the 97 UPS strike? When that happened back then, was anyone? I was a year before I was born, so it's very crazy for us. But when it came to that, because of how powerful the union is and how integral, it depends on the direction, even if capitalism continues to exist, the consciousness of logistics workers, this is something that the US government and the Democrats and Republicans do put a lot of focus in. So when people remember how powerful that 97 strike was, how great of a contract it was won under reform leadership. Ron Carey, TDU, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, had a lot to play in that. They ended up cooing that leadership. So after that strike happened, after the success, and it was so popular, 74% of Americans supported it. Right after that, the Democrats and UPS went after Ron Carey. They trumped up very incorrect and wrong charges of money laundering. The Democrats who helped give him money, they fudged the numbers to make it look like their support was actually money laundering. And they ousted Ron Carey and they expelled him. It's one of the many lessons of the Democrats betraying labor. So every time someone tells me, especially my family, oh, well, you need to vote blue. If you're such a, lefty, if you're a socialist, why don't you vote blue? Well, they cooed my union. And so Ron Carey got expelled. And it also adds to a new definition of it be your own. How are you supposed to be for workers and then you're going to infiltrate and overthrow the leadership of a union like the Teamsters? So when they kicked them out, they installed, people will know this person, but Jimmy Hoffa, the big union guy, well, his son took over after that. And he ran the union into the ground. In that period of 2000 to, he didn't run for re-election, so 2021, there was the lowest strike action in the history of the Teamsters Union. All across the board, contracts were getting worse and worse and worse. And at UPS, some of the issues that have been dealing with us to the point where it's almost like it's getting, especially with inflation, it's getting to the point where UPS is no longer being that job where, they call it the road to middle class. People can take this job, it's very hard to get fired. And then, once you get full-time, you get paid like 50, 60K a year. That's kind of one of the reasons why I want to work here and why I keep it up for 4 years. And that's being eroded away. So one of the things that is a big issue at UPS is the wait year for part-timers. So I've been working here for 4 years. This is the longest job I've ever had, and I'm not even full-time yet. There's no positions available for me. And that forces me to try to get a second job, and that's very difficult to do. Most of the times I don't even manage that. And so part-timers are dealing with what we in the union have been calling poverty wages, where it's something that you cannot, support yourself on. The people before, you had to get full-time in the hub, not delivery truck drivers. We have to wait 10 plus years. Who's gonna wait 10 years for full-time? And then your seniority only starts there when it comes to those benefits. So you could even get this job at 30, wait till you're 40 to get full-time, retire at 60. You only have a 20-year pension plan. They don't count that 10 years you did before. Other issues that's been happening is, and then even when you get full-time, you have to wait a 4-year period, so your wages freezes, and then you get the top rate. 4 years of working full-time, and you don't get paid a full-time rate. That's ridiculous. Some of the other issues is when it comes to, there's this weird, it's Article 67 in the contract, it's the dishonesty clause. And so if they even think you're being dishonest, and the technicality of say you said one thing and they took it as something else and they had to clarify that, even asking for that clarification, they can say, oh, you're being dishonest, so they can fire you. And then you're out for a week or two. You're gonna get your job back, but there are people, especially big union activists, who go out, get fired 4 or 5 times a year. Oh, just for vague things of dishonesty. For the delivery truck drivers, one of the last contracts, and this is part of the old Hoffa Junior administration that was so bad, the wage tiers, if you see some of the things right over there that we have from the union, no more tiers. All the new delivery drivers since the 2018 contract, that top rate for a delivery driver is $40, $45, right? They have these new positions, and I don't have time to make the distinction, but you pretty much fall under a 22.3 or a 22.4. It's named after the article. And you're at a completely different wage tier that you cap out at around 35 or 36 when you get full-time compared to the other drivers who are 40, 45. And you can't refuse overtime. So once all these other guys, once they hit their 8 hours, they can go home. There are delivery drivers now who go in at 8 o'clock and don't come home till 10 or 11. That's crazy. And it makes people want to work somewhere else. And then getting onto that I think it's called a 9.5, I'm not really sure. It really depends on the specific area. But getting into that driving position where you do have, all the protections, that's incredibly difficult to get. And you're forced to work a 6th day. If you look at some of the Teamsters propaganda, they say no forced 6 punch. So they'll force you to work a Saturday. So you're working 6 days a week at a $10 pay difference. You're forced to work more hours. Nobody's going to work there. There's a huge drive of UPS workers who will rather go to FedEx and Amazon. And even though they get paid less, they get worse hours. They're going to, they'll at least have a life. They're not working these crazy hours. And another last thing for, just to highlight some of them, the AC in delivery trucks. Amazon and USPS has AC in their delivery trucks. We don't. And they won't implement them. And sadly, and this really hits me hard, especially considering last August, one of our brothers in California, Esteban Chavez, he died of heat stroke at the young age of 24, my age, because there was no ACs, and he could have actually survived, but the neighbors didn't find him until 10 minutes in. And so he was brought to the hospital, I'm pretty sure, but I think he died in the hospital. It was a very tragic death. That didn't even wake up UPS to implement the ACs. And another thing is when it comes to surveillance, they're implementing surveillance cameras around. And I'll be touching on that a little bit later about what the union's doing about that. But they're already implementing them now. They didn't really care to ask for the union. They're saying they're not going to use it to harass employees. And it says in our contract they can't bring up recordings like that. But we're dealing it time and time again. Brothers and sisters are getting pulled into the office. They're showing a video. And we're just like, well, we can't do anything about that because it's on video. And they're like adamant pushing it. And, that's, very bad. So, when it comes to all these different issues, this is why, and these were all some of the main issues that led Teamsters to eventually oust Hoffa. And that reform movement started really immediately after the coup that happened in the 90s, where New York City, Philadelphia, and Kentucky, those locals fell under reform leadership and just kept building and building and building. And to the culminating to what we've seen now. So Sean O'Brien's election to it a couple of years ago was pretty positive, despite some of the issues with Sean O'Brien. Sean O'Brien was a big-time Hoffa Jr. ally, to the point where in Providence, 251, that local, when they got a reformer in, and he was getting, up to the election, Sean O'Brien actually, at one of the regional Joint Council 10 meetings, had threatened to assault this brother and say, I'm going to punch you if you, and he got banned from the union for a week of that misconduct. And now he's coming around and now endorses it. He's made up with this guy and apologized it. He's taken a different turn because that last election where Hoffa Jr. technically won. If anyone knows anything about union elections, usually if you won, that's a comfortable, not a landslide, but a comfortable win. You get like 60, 70%. So when Hoffa Jr. got reelected with just 51%, that's what caused the break. That's what caused Sean O'Brien to step aside. That's what caused a lot of these more left-wing aspects of the union bureaucracy to step aside. And the reformers, people on TDU, Teamsters for a Democratic Union, and other more independent union leaders and rank and file had organized under Teamsters United. And that would then propel O'Brien. And what is invigorating about O'Brien is that O'Brien's actually willing to bring the strike back. And that is such an incredible, important tool for any change, is to bring the strike back. Thank you. So I'm also part of the Independent Socialist Group. That was part of the intro too. And so for us as Marxists and revolutionary socialists, we believe first and foremost that through all divisions, even though we definitely fight for, against special oppression, against racism, against sexism, we view the greatest thing that unifies us is us as workers, our relationship to capitalism, our relationship to society. And this is one of the main issues of the U.S., like any labor movement, any socialist movement, any, anti-oppression movement at all, is that we've lost this kind of class analysis in the sense of either prioritizing class or having that be a significant contributing factor. And that is something that we need to be trying to bring back. And so when someone like Sean O'Brien is talking about working class action to solve working class issues that affects all sorts of people, especially the Black working class, especially working class Latinos and immigrants. Many of these, groups fighting, especially in the civil rights movement, organized as a class. There's a very famous saying from the civil rights movement: "Not all skin folk are kinfolk," and that's something that really resonates with this union and activity. And so the difference is that, well, that's great, Sean O'Brien's saying this, well, what action has followed through? And that's a pretty good question, and this kind of brings into some concerns. Well, there is a possibility of a strike, there's also a possibility of a really good contract with a very tiny concession. And that kind of happened with the DHL, which is, I forgot what it stands for, but it's a company like UPS, and then the victory of a national contract for Costco. So those are the two major significant contracts that the Brotherhood, the IBT had won since O'Brien's election. And DHL's contract, if you look into the details, especially compared to the past, it was really great. I mean, they got wages across all boards, they got back pays in certain specific working conditions, they got great expansion of healthcare, they got great protections, they actually knocked out their dishonesty clause, I'm pretty sure, they got good expansion of bereavement, added of pay, but one thing that was the major concession was they actually conceded on the implementation of surveillance cameras. So that's something that we got forced on, that we said we didn't want. That's something O'Brien said we're not going to let happen, and it happened anyway. And even though there was the concession within that of these are going to be no audio, no color, and the commitment that we can't use them to be harassing. But the whole problem with that is that they don't even need to bring that up. They just need to catch you doing something multiple times. And now that they know that you do it, they can just watch you do it and have someone, be on your ass for that shit. I'm so sorry. That was a double combo. I'm a teamster. I'm a potty mouth. I try to think so hard about what I'm going to say. My apologies. But
You don't know what a potty mouth is.
oh, trust me. If you saw me at work, but
Good thing the surveillance cameras don't have audio.
I know, yeah, that's a great point. There's also strong, I have cussed out many supervisors at my job, so, and all were well earned. And so, what was I even saying? So, but the thing is, then they're gonna start watching, then they're gonna bring it up. All they need to know is that you're doing something that's technically wrong for them to just fire you. And that connects with the whole dishonesty clause thing too. So, and that didn't end up in a strike. And the Costco thing, it's a little bit different. It's not as bad because in the finer details, this is actually the first national master contract that Costco workers won. It was 35,000. It included a bunch of whole new workers in it, and that was pretty good. But there were some, concessions in there in terms of healthcare payments and certain wage increases, and that didn't go on strike. So it kind of brings into the question of, now that we got a reformer in, we need to be critical of all of our leaders all the time. You know what I'm saying? But nonetheless, this invigoration and rejuvenation that's happening in the union is an incredibly great opportunity for socialists, for progressives, for the Green Party here to get involved in that, to build a base and to participate in that movement of building the labor movement. For us, in the independent socialist group, for socialist teamsters that I work with and coordinate all the time, the working class will and always will be the greatest social force of movement and change. Nothing can happen without that. You can look at it how you want. Sure, they have all the guns, they have all the money, but if we stop working, if we withhold our labor and we do it in such an organized fashion, we get to set the tone, we get to make decisions like that. And that's something that we need to be pushing for now. So, thank you. I'm running a little low on time, so I'm gonna skip some points. But when it comes to ways that we can, so why I asked to speak at this and everything like that and do this workshop is that for any strike to happen, and this is where it comes into, and I'm not going to go into the nitty-gritty of the whole labor movement, but sometimes people go on strike not prepared. Sometimes people just throw out strike just to strike, and there's also the conversation about the general strike versus local strikes, and I'm not going to get too much into that. I'm not saying a general strike is bad though, but there's certain things that you have to do to prepare for it. And that's also kind of comes into the question of why possibly DHL and the Costco workers didn't go on strike, because it's not something you just nilly-willy throw out there. Everything needs to be done with a plan. And especially with the history of capitalism, capitalism has done an incredibly great job at adapting to the change and adapting to the bending of, what workers want. Socialism used to be incredibly popular with the working class movement. That's why you had giant communist revolutions all throughout Europe and Africa, Latin America. And the fact that you have capitalist countries that, like in India, that have socialism enshrined into their constitution, it shows that how willing they are to adapt to the changes. And so this brings into a whole question of that we see in popular consciousness. Well, if everything's working out for you, if you have good healthcare, if you have good wages, why do you care about stuff? Because we still have capitalism. We still, that's great that our own lives are fine, and that's really great that at the end of the day, especially when I get full-time, I'm not gonna have to worry about finances and stuff, but I'm still gonna have to worry about, this is preaching to the choir, but the planet is dying. What are we gonna do with that? So it brings into the political aspect of it too. The Teamsters, have such a huge role in pushing for green, renewable energy legislation like that, changing how UPS does its own stuff because this building is filthy. And, I think there was a presentation about how warehouses contribute to like had mentioned how the warehouses contributing to pollution. We Teamsters can say that, like, hey, this is happening this is the materials that you're using, we can't be using that, we need to switch to this. Especially the energy that we use to, power the delivery truck drivers, the lawn drive, everything like that. With the property that UPS has, there's plenty of spaces for solar energy, especially at the top building. It's incredibly flat. Shrewsbury Hub is right on the highway. Jill Stein was talking about that. So, sorry, I'm gonna go a minute over that 20-minute thing, but just
You're in trouble now.
So building for it. So this is why we're talking to the Greens. So, when it comes to elections and stuff like that, one of the ways that you win an election is if you earn the confidence and you earn the mandate of the working class. And one of the greatest ways to do that is to actually show up and do activity and organizing, have your, whatever it may be. And I know for us in the Independent Socialist Group, we worked very hard, in a lot of different aspects in pushing for Howie Hawkins. I know Jamie over here, we've done so much stuff. She even brought a bunch of Greens out for us when one of our members got arrested in the BLM rallies in 2020. And we got those charges dropped, by the way. And the Greens came out, driving out from Western Mass, that was crazy. So we definitely, support that and want that. And one of the ways I think this can benefit the Greens and just the working class in general is that for any strike to happen, I know I kind of diverged on this point, for it to win, it needs to be organized, coordinated. That needs broad support of the working class. That needs involvement of every section of the working class, every section of society. And that's also why general strikes is an incredibly powerful tool. And so for us, ways to build solidarity for this is to please, you look up on social media and stuff like that, any Teamster page you can find, any Teamsters figures like Sean O'Brien himself, Fred Zuckerman, Lindsay O'Doherty, some pretty big Teamsters union leaders, share their stuff, promote their stuff, get involved, talk to UPS Teamsters you have. If the UPS Teamster delivers your trucks, talk to them about that. I'm gonna put them on top, but we have all these like car signs that you can put in your cars. That's a great way to show solidarity. They're sharing, all the media and stuff, donating to the strike fund. So wherever you are, there's a local, you can just go to their hall and say, I'd like to put some money to your strike fund. There's local strike funds, there's national strike fund. I don't know how you can donate to the national, but in Worcester it's local 170. I don't know what it is in Western Mass. There's 25 out in Boston. There's that, and this is the greatest point. I'm going to end on this point, so save you all time and stuff. Really important for the Greens to come every day of the strike, whatever picket's closer to you, whatever's a big thing, show up in contingents and wear your stuff, wear your shirts, have that support, and whatever you can do. And get into those conversations. When you're talking to working class people, you don't want to make it about you, but it is kind of, you want to build the Green Party because you want to be confident and say, well, the Green Party is a much more legitimate person and organization to vote for than the Democrats. But just building that solidarity, people to be visible for you. I know in my hub, we all talk shit about the Democrats and Republicans all the time. And there's a lot of conservatives there, but, really try to talk, as a socialist, I try to talk to my conservative brothers, even if I don't like them, and I still have to defend them in union meetings, even if I don't think they should work there, but, principles of a unionist. So, that's incredibly important. So I really hope August 1st is when it expires. We most likely are going on strike. So I know the worker strike back, the speaker, Alicia mentioned if, and it's still a strong if, but it's looking more and more likely that we will. So I really implore the Greens to discuss this amongst yourselves, talk about if you know anyone in other states, but really make those, those picket lines, those green delegations. And I'm sure it's gonna change a lot of moods in the union. So that's it. Yeah, I know you will. No, so it's a national contract. So all 350,000 UPS workers will be going on strike. That will be one of the biggest and largest strike actions ever in the entire history of the United States. And which is why this is literally probably easily the most important thing that we have in the next coming months. This is going to be the biggest strike in the last 20 years. I think it's like 5th or 6th, historically speaking. So, no, it's going to be huge, all 350,000. So, thank you.
We have time for one more question, and he's got his hand up.
So this is sort of a two-part question. So you did mention a little history with the Teamster unions. There was a huge decline under Hoffa Jr. I know under Hoffa Sr., even though he was a controversial figure, the Teamsters loved him, and he was, huge. They were sort of at the peak of their popularity and size under Senior. So I'm just curious. In recent years, in your experience, has the Teamster unions regained some of their lost numbers and influence? And are you seeing a growing trend in that direction? Or just curious.
Yeah. So, Jimmy Hoffa is a very big figure. And so one of the people I had actually mentioned, Lindsay O'Doherty, she kind of represents, she's the vice president. She's so if you saw the WGA, Writers Guild of America go on strike, that Teamsters have a lot of people in that adjacent to it, and she's been on the ground there. She styles herself as what she calls a Hoffite, I think, or something like that, or bringing back Hoffa's legacy. And so, there's a lot of popularity there, but there was the issue to understand why Hoffa came about was, communists used to be incredibly involved in the Teamsters Union. People know that the 1934 Teamster General Strike in Minneapolis, where pretty much the Teamsters and the working class, they essentially took control over the city and they administered it on and off for months. The government denounced it as a Soviet coup, and it was actually run by Trotskyists in the SWP. And Hoffa only came about because many of those communist elements were purged in the 40s and 50s. They were arrested, they were stripped of their positions. And Hoffa came about through populist messaging, so almost like a Trump kind of figure or Sanders figure. And well, we want to, he did a lot of stuff, but there is a lot of political concern when it comes to that because a lot of that was very aggressive individualistic actions. And when the working class takes actions that can be seen as an attack on the capitalists, it needs to be unified and coordinated. It can't be bullying, it can't be backhand negotiations. And that's kind of what Hoffa did, was it was like gangster activity. And in the 80s and 90s, I mean, that as much as, okay, sure, that one short terms, but that is huge ways for the government to just put them under federal control. Yeah. And TDU, if people remember that, Diana Kilmurray, she was a big TDU leader. She's retired now, but she led an effort of many to kind of get rid of those and avoid the government takeover. So yeah, he is popular. There's a lot of concerns at the end of the day. We don't really want to go back to those Hoffa senior years. Because of the target that it put. And look at him, he pretty much got killed. Like, I know nobody found his body or anything, but nah, he got yeah. And I don't think that was from the government, I think it was from the gangs. So then the second part is the growth, yeah. So Yeah, since O'Brien got elected in, there's been massive unionization campaigns, and we used to be 1.3 million. The union now is reporting 1.5 million. So that's about 200,000 more workers. A lot of that had to do with the Costco agreement. Lots of more regional stuff are expanding. I know Clark University grad students joined us. That's just a small amount. But in terms of, I know before, during the Hoffa years, I wouldn't really be able to be involved in much of the local stuff, but they, are involving so much more rank and file. They're bringing back some stuff they did before where rank and file can be on the negotiating committees now, and that is an incredibly important thing. Even though I'm an explicit socialist and the union bureaucrats are all liberals, they keep involving me in stuff and keep willing to build up this more working class thing rather than the subservience to the bosses, the capitalists in the state. So overall, I mean, it's going in the right direction. Yeah. So I think that's it. Yeah. So thank you.
And now we have our election results, our election supervisor. David is gonna give us the results.
All right, you can't see it, but here it is.
So there were 23 ballots submitted. All 23 of them ranked Mike Pascucci for first for male co-chair. There were a smattering of votes for female co-chairs, but nobody achieved a majority, which is what it would take, a majority of ballots cast in order to elect anybody. So that's fine, because we didn't have any official nominees anyway. In the hard-fought battle for secretary, Maureen Doyle took 17 number one votes, and Big Mike took 5 number one votes. So Maureen will get to be our secretary for the next term. Thank you very much. All 23 ballots listed Brian Cady as their number one choice for treasurer. 20 ballots listed Eileen Wheeler-Sheehan to be the director of communications, so she's elected. The threshold, just so you know, is 12. Anyone with more than 12 top votes gets the jobs. No director of fundraising was nominated and none was elected, so there's a to-do list item. Zachary Contra received 23 number one votes for director of membership. Maureen Doyle received 17 ballots that ranked her either number one or number two for GPUS female delegate, so she gets to serve in that role, and no other person was elected to be a female delegate. So that's an opening that the state has, which it may decide to fill at some point. Among the male or non-binary GPUS delegates, Danny Factor received 17 ballots that ranked him either 1 or 2, so he's eligible to take one of those seats. And Mike Pascucci was listed on 16 ballots as either 1 or 2 or alternate. So, however it ends up being disposed, Mike Pascucci can serve to represent Massachusetts at the National Committee. And these are our election results, and I will type them up and send them to Maureen so she can include them in the minutes for this meeting. Thank you.
And do we have silent auction results? We're at breakneck speed now.
I think it might be easier to do it over here.
I'm coming. Will the mic work? He says I can go out on the streets of Worcester and celebrate.
This really nice English sparrows, fine art glissy print is to Elizabeth Humphrey. And the dartboard, this very nice dartboard, is to Karen Sargent. Oh, and I should have said, and you can pay me and then you can take your things at the end. I'll finish this first. What? Oh, okay.
Yeah, she had to leave at midday.
Okay.
Somebody take it. You'll take care of it?
Send it with Ronnie.
Right.
Oh, yeah, I was gonna say, does anybody live in our area? Okay, so this CD, which was made by Charlene DiCalagero, Ocean, Odyssey song, sorry, and a pair of post earrings, goes to Eileen Sheehan. So, and I wanted to say thank you for everybody contributing things. Danny Factor got the oregano plant. It's a great perennial plant. Spreads very nicely. Okay, there's only one bid for a copy of Streets, which is by Mel King. And that was won by Karen Sargent. And there are 9 copies. Actually, I only see 3 here. There were 9 copies of Chain of Change by Mel King. And one of them goes to Karen Sargent, one goes to Charlene DiCalagero, and one goes to Rick Purcell. Okay. This one. This really nice framed painting goes to Elizabeth Humphrey. So yeah, you're gonna have some nice artwork. And this book, The War Prayer, by Mark Twain, goes to Karen Sargent for her contribution. Okay, okay, she's got quite a few things. I'll just settle down after I read all these. Okay, and Ronnie got your biochar and compost. Great. Yep. Did you get this? Yeah. Oh, you know what? And I didn't put it next to this. Oh, it's the picture of the iris. I'm sorry. I just put it in a different place. Yeah, Eileen got that. Very nice. And the rabbit planter, which is very nice. I'm not going to pick it up because it's kind of heavy. And I don't want to accidentally break it. By Rick Purcell. Okay, and this book, My Search for Answers, Truth, and Meaning, the autobiography of Kwame Sakur, goes to Karen Sargent also. I know, Karen. Okay, and here we are back at the beginning. So thank you everybody who contributed and everybody who made it. No, but I didn't have that.
Out to the left.
Oh, sorry, I missed this one. Basic, thank you, Ryan. A Good Floor by Thomas Ricks. It was a bid from Michael Mabry.
But we have to do that.
Yeah.
Oh. Ronnie. Can Ronnie please come to the platform? Can Ronnie please come to the stage? Will Ronnie Beal please report to the stage? Ronnie. Ronnie, please report to the courthouse. The police are looking for you.
I think we'll cancel it, only because it's 4:30 and we have to get all these chairs and tables put away. And I think it's just too much.
So we're gonna conclude it.
I think we have.
How about the chapters?
Well, that's it, chapter.
Do the chapters?
Yeah, it's a chapter report. Yeah, we're going to have to. We're running out of time.
So we're not doing the chapter reports either? Okay.
I don't think.
So that's gonna conclude our convention. Thank you guys for coming this year.
Thank you. Set up last night.
It's incredible. Thank you for our great MC.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, the co-facilitators.
Brian will.
Mulhern and Rick Russell.
Second.
And,
I don't know how to shut this off.
Thank you.
Yeah. We went overtime on the streets. Yeah.